Chapter 301. An incense burner table, wine utensils, 3 sacrificial offerings, incense sticks, and candles. Zhao Kuo's storage ring was like a storehouse of a grocery store. Wu Qi found all sorts of things that he could not even imagine. In short, an almost perfect golden orchid oath of brotherhood ceremony was successfully completed. Apart from the heavens, there were also 2 great pythons, who were drooling and staring at the 2 muscles on Zhao Kuo's buttocks without blinking their eyes. Although it was a ceremony of swearing brotherhood, the oath made by the 2 brothers was very different. Wu Qi's oath was very simple. He swore to the heavens that as long as Zhao Kuo remained loyal to his brother, Wu Qi would not take the initiative to harm or frame Zhao Kuo, and when Zhao Kuo was in danger, Wu Qi would do his best to rescue him. On the other hand, Zhao Kuo's oath was very complicated, so complicated that it was like a contract of selling his body. There were all sorts of unreasonable and tyrannical terms, which made Zhao Kuo want to cry, but no tears came out. As Wei Xiaoxiao had used a soul substitution puppet to escape the punishment of the oath, Wu Qi made Zhao Kuo's prime nascent divinity oath change to the following: if Zhao Kuo betrays the oath, or does anything wrong to elder brother Wu Qi, he will suffer the punishment of heavenly thunder for the rest of his life, year after year, day after day, month after month. As long as Zhao Kuo is still alive, the oath will never end. If Zhao Kuo possesses any magical item such as a soul substitution puppet, the oath will come into effect immediately, and the heavens will bear witness to Zhao Kuo's death. It was such a vicious oath. After swearing it, Zhao Kuo's eyes turned green as he stared at Wu Qi. Gladly, Wu Qi untied the spirit-restricting rope, hugged Zhao Kuo, who was half a head taller than Wu Qi, and said, "Second brother. From now on, I will take care of you. You can do whatever you want under the heaven." Without any hesitation, Wu Qi patted Zhao Kuo on the shoulder, took out a heavenly wit fruit and gave it to Zhao Kuo. "Eat this is a heavenly wit fruit. Not only will it improve your intellect, it can also improve your ability to comprehend the heavenly Tao by 3 to 10 times. Zhao Kuo's eyeballs nearly popped out from his eye sockets. He snatched the heavenly wit fruit and swallowed it whole. He immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and began to absorb the medicinal energy with all his might. A misty light spread out from Zhao Kuo's body, and a dazzling beam of light shot out from the center of his brows, reaching a distance of over 10 feet. Zhao Kuo's figure became blurry, as if he had merged with the world. 2 hours later, Zhao Kuo opened his eyes and slowly rose to his feet. He took a deep breath, cupped his fist and bowed deeply to Wu Qi. "Zhao Kuo offers greetings, elder brother. Such a rare treasure of the heaven and earth, as expected, as expected." After racking his brain for a while, he still could not find a suitable word to describe the feeling. Shaking his head, he praised, "It is indeed marvelous. With this spirit fruit, Zhao Kuo will have a chance to become a heaven immortal. All this is thanks to elder brother." Wu Qi shook his head disapprovingly. "You flatter me," he said coolly. "We are brothers, so let's not talk about this. In the future, we will be staying in White Cloud Immortals sect and Tranquil Vimla sect, and we will belong to 2 allied organizations. There will be many things that we need to do in the future." Zhao Kuo understood what Wu Qi meant. He chuckled and said in a low voice, "If that old fool Lu Buwei comes again to scheme against you, elder brother, or if there is someone else who wants to deal with you, I guarantee you will receive the news in time. If there is someone here who wants to scheme against me, or my father, or my brothers, I hope elder brother can inform me in time." Wu Qi nodded with a smile, lowered his voice, and said, "That is reasonable. In the future, when we brothers work together, what can we not achieve?" After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "You have a few powerful crossbows in your ring. They seem to be great Zhao's standard crossbows." Zhao Kuo took out a few huge crossbows that looked like flood dragons, and had powerful arms shaped like phoenix wings. He pointed at them and said with a smile, "Yes, these are the star-shattering crossbows used by the Imperial Guards of Great Zhao's Imperial Palace. They require bolts forged with supreme-grade energy stones, and are said to be able to shatter the stars once they are fired. That's why they have such a name. Although it is a bit exaggerated, it can still serve as a very strong deterrent to Earth immortals of nascent soul realm. Casually grabbing the few crossbows, Wuqi nodded and said, "All right, you can do whatever you want. I'll go look for some people to deal with." After bumping fists with Zhao Kuo, Wuqi shoved gold horn and silver horn into the spirit breeding ring, then transformed into a stream of yellow mist and plunged into the ground. Zhao Kuo's face twitched as he stared at the spot where Wuqi disappeared. He could not help but gasp in astonishment, "I can't believe he can travel freely in this immortal abode. No wonder I didn't find out how he sneakily attacked me from behind. How frightening. It will be worthwhile to become sworn brothers with a man like this, as my father will have a powerful helper. With the help of that spirit fruit, perhaps in less than 100 years, I will be able to." A cold gleam flashed in his eyes. Suddenly, a large number of soldiers emerged from the light screen behind Zhao Kuo's back. Inside the light screen, a towering murderous aura swept across the surroundings. Carrying the star-shattering crossbows donated by Zhao Kuo, Wuqi traveled quickly through the entire immortal abode. His next assassination targets were not only Great Zhao's captains and cultivators, he even killed a few Great Chu's captains. As for Daqin's practitioners and captains, nearly 100 of them were killed by Wuqi's sneaky attacks. The Tsang-Ao immortal abode was already densely covered with restrictive spells, and these murdered cultivators had spent more than 90% of their energy to deal with them. On top of that, Wuqi brazenly attacked them from behind with an immortal item. Who could withstand his attack? As long as Wuqi bumped into someone who had a grudge against Wuqi, he would kill them one after another. Of course, Wuqi would not provoke formidable characters like Li Si and Su Fu, who had thorns all over their bodies. Whenever he bumped into them from a distance, he would avoid them as soon as possible. Those who were killed by Wuqi were dismembered by 5 horses, and the words "killer," Lu Buwei, were written on the ground near their corpses. This kind of framing scheme was useless against the cunning emperors and ministers of the 6 states, but it was enough to make Lu Buwei lose his appetite for half a year. Another half a month had passed. Basically, all the restrictive spells in the Tsang-Ao immortal abode were broken by the group led by the cultivators from the 2 immortal sections. Many areas had been opened up, and a large number of cultivators had gathered together. The corpses of the cultivators and captains killed by Wuqi had been discovered, and the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties were struck with terror. Someone was actually attacking his own companions in the immortal abode? On this particular day, while dragging a star-shattering crossbow behind him, Wuqi was traveling aimlessly under the ground. Suddenly, a chilly ghost aura, which Wuqi was very familiar with, came pressing down from above his head. Stealthily, he poked half of his head out from under the ground and looked towards the square in front of a tall tower. Sure enough, it was Lu Buwei who was attacking the restrictive spells on the front gate of the tower, together with a group of over 30 people from Lu clan. Among these people, 8 of them possessed the cultivation base of nascent soul realm, while the rest were at the level of Jin Dan. Together with Lu Buwei, they were attacking the tower's front gate with golden flames, and the tremendous energy shockwaves that shook the surrounding ground. The pagoda stood on a flat square made of green bricks. It was also a huge space constructed by a heaven immortal Sumeru mustard seed. The square measured nearly 100 miles in both width and length, and was surrounded by towering city walls that reached into the clouds. The pagoda in the center was 36 stories tall, and its square body was gradually shrinking with each story. The outline of the pagoda was full and thick, filled with an indescribable power. On the lintel of the front gate of the tower was a plaque with 3 large characters written on it. They were none other than Spirit Pills Pagoda. Next to Lu Buwei, the 5 heavenly ghosts of 5 colors had revealed themselves, waving their ghost claws and smashing at the golden restrictive spells on the front gate. Sitting cross-legged on a golden plate, Lu Buwei threw his head back and laughed out loud. Immortal pills left behind by the ancient immortals? I'd like to see what's the difference between them and the pills concocted by our clan. Ha, ha, it would be great if I could get a few pill recipes. Wuqi frowned slightly. Even if there were any immortal pills left behind in the Spirit Pills Pagoda 2 eons ago, they would have turned into ashes by now. Unless they were pills concocted by primordial immortals or divine gold immortals, which had gained sentience and could absorb natural energy from the outside world to cultivate on their own, the pills concocted by other immortals were just dead things. After more than 10 billion years of 2 eons, all spirit pills would have turned into ashes by now. However, the pill formulas mentioned by Lu Buwei were highly possible. In the Scroll of Stealing, there were only some unorthodox methods of concocting pills, such as sleeping incense, anesthetics, and many others. As for the proper and useful pill formulas, only the ancestral awakening and body tempering soup could be found, and there was not a single proper pill formula in the book. If Wu Qi wanted to make a name for himself in the world of cultivators, how could he not have a few good pill formulas? He could use them, and he could not lack the people around him. After a brief moment of pondering, a wave of water rippled behind Wu Qi's back, as 18 celestial fiend puppets slowly separated themselves from Wu Qi's body and revealed themselves. Their bodies wriggled and wiggled, and gradually transformed into the appearance of Zhao Ling and some other great Zhao military officers whom Wu Qi had killed. After handing over the star-shattering crossbows to the puppets, Wu Qi quietly pointed at Lu Buwei and the others, while he himself plunged into the ground. With heavy footsteps, the 18 celestial fiend puppets charged towards Lu Buwei and the others. The one who had transformed into Zhao Ling cried out loudly, "Old Mr. Lu, I think Lu lure alone is not enough to move your heart." 7 star-shattering crossbows were fired. Bolts forged with supreme-grade energy stones shot whistling through the air, shooting towards Lu Buwei and the people around him with a cold gleam. 8 nascent soul earth immortals from Lu Buwei's clan cried out sternly as they wielded their defensive magical treasures and charged forward. Lu Buwei jerked his head back and saw the star-shattering crossbows in the puppet's hands. He could not help but cry out sternly, "Star-shattering crossbows! Don't take them head-on." Before his voice could fade away, 7 bolts, each 12 feet long, had smashed into the bodies of the people of Lu clan. They exploded with a boom, sending out a blinding light and raging flame that swept across 10 miles in circumference. The few people from Lu Buwei's clan were on the verge of collapsing under the bombardment of the bolts. Their defensive magical treasures dimmed abruptly, as they were nearly shattered by the star-shattering crossbows. A dragon roar echoed out as several dozens of purple beams shot out from the ground, trapping Lu Buwei and the others within them. Wu Qi, who was clad in a piece of animal skin and had his face wrapped with a white cloth, sprung up from the ground. A purple gleam burst out from his forehead, as the cold electric mirror shot out several hundred thunderbolts soundlessly, smashing viciously onto Lu Buwei and the group of his clan members. The thunderbolts and flame drowned everything. One after another, the defensive magical treasures and magical treasures of Lu Buwei's clan members were shattered by the thunderbolts, while their fleshly bodies were completely turned into nothingness amidst the thunderbolts that came sweeping over like a great tide. Lu Buwei, who did not have the time to unleash his defensive magical treasure, let out a miserable howl. His lower abdomen was struck by the cold electric mirror for 72 thunderbolts in a row, causing blood and flesh to fly everywhere. In just a blink of an eye, a large hole was opened up on Lu Buwei's lower abdomen. Chapter 302. Wu Qi shoved all the pill bottles into the ring, which was quite a fortune. He picked up the storage rings of the cultivators of Lu clan, which were shattered by the cold electric mirror, and stored all the energy stones and other items into the black dragon spirit ring. After that, he gave all the rings to a celestial fiend puppet, asking him to string them up with a thread of heavenly silk and hang them around his neck. Wu Qi dared not to collect the storage rings of those great Zhao military officers and cultivators, fearing that he might give himself away. But, as he had already offended Lu Buwei's clan members, Wu Qi had no reason to hesitate. The water in the pool was extremely cold. Although he had protected his body with innate energies of 5 elements, he could still vaguely feel the piercing cold coming from the water. When he thought of the fact that Yen Dan and his companions had mysteriously appeared on Myriad Immortals' planet after their deaths, Wu Qi felt his scalp going numb. It seemed he had found something incredible. No wonder Jiangqing Zi, who was desperate, was able to break through the flaming nether ocean and come to Myriad Immortals' planet. Even if he were to run naked, he would still be able to reach myriad immortals' planets safely. Right after Li Yuan sighed, Yu Yao and Yu Ji snapped at her at the same time. Yu Tan, shut up. Do you want to die? Wu Qi stamped his feet. Damn it, he had forgotten that Lu Buwei had such a precious treasure with him. Narrowing his eyes and pondering for a while, Wu Qi grinned coldly. The three girls looked at each other. Suddenly, Li Yuan laughed and said, "What a coincidence. Are both sisters here to search for treasures as well? Or perhaps, Yan Dan and his companions had been secretly controlled by someone, and they did not know it." After circling a few times under the ground, Wu Qi was about to collect a few strands of earth core yin qi for later use. Suddenly, the air above the pond began to twist violently. A small fist shattered the void, and Yu Ji, clad in a blood-red palace dress, strode out. She looked like she had just gone through a fierce battle. Her hair was disheveled, her body drenched in sweat, and she was gasping for breath. The forces of the 6 nations had already developed to a sufficiently powerful level. Was it time to let them go out and stir up trouble? If this matter was thoroughly investigated and the truth came to light, the culprit would be found out and punished severely. Then, they would have to be careful when they were under the control of the 2 immortal sects in the future. If it was Lu Buwei who took the blame and was punished by the 2 great immortal sects, then, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 nations would have to start thinking. The 2 great immortal sects only had 6 heaven immortals, and among the 6 nations, there were many who had the chance to break through to the heaven immortal realm. The so-called oath of not deceiving their masters and destroying their ancestors had no binding force at all. They couldn't deceive their masters and destroy their ancestors, and there were plenty of people in the 6 nations who could help them do so. With a cold smile, Yu Yao said calmly, "Therefore, immortal items and magical treasures belong to those who are fated with them. Although you and I are sisters of the same clan, we," satisfied, Wu Qi slipped out of the Spirit Pills pavilion and continued his looting. Wherever he went, not even a blade of grass grew. As long as he took a fancy to the treasures he could take away without wasting them, he would take them all away. Wu Qi wandered aimlessly in the immortal abode, and finally found a small energy vein stretching out from the ground. Following the energy vein, he found the small flower garden that was isolated from the rest of the immortal abode. Sensing the incredibly strong cold energy in the pond, he hurriedly plunged into it, sliding along the ground and plunging into the pond, which was about an acre in circumference and 1,000 feet deep. In the blink of an eye, just as Wu Qi was about to kill Lu Buwei, a strange light flashed across his body, and a shabby soul substitution puppet fell from the sky. In the blink of an eye, Lu Buwei had disappeared without a trace. Putting aside these secret schemes, Wu Qi continued to wander aimlessly in the underground of the immortal abode. Suddenly, he came to the southwest corner of the immortal abode, under a closed flower garden. The garden was not large, only a few acres in size. In the middle of it was a dark green pond, surrounded by dense wisteria flowers. The water in the pond was piercingly cold, and the wisteria was purple-green in color. This small flower garden pond gave off the feeling of the netherworld, making one's heart palpitate and unable to extricate themselves. Almost instinctively, the 6 heaven immortals thought that Lu Buwei was killing people to establish his power. Although they had profound Taoist magics and powerful divine abilities, they were simple and honest people. Their Taoist hearts were as clear as water, just like the hearts of innocent children. Therefore, when they saw the words left behind by Wu Qi, they immediately flew into a rage and ordered their disciples to summon Lu Buwei as soon as possible, to ask him why he had killed so many people. Yu Ji took 2 deep breaths and said in a low voice, "I don't know what kind of treasure there is here. I was chased here by a poisonous insect. That poisonous insect is so powerful. It's actually an extinct ancient flying scorpion. I don't know how it managed to survive until now, but its strength is really amazing. You don't have enough spiritual power to activate me." The message sent by the spirit-restricting rope was very clear. As an immortal artifact, its power was indeed infinite. But a greater part of the power of an immortal artifact came from the person using it. The stronger the immortal power obtained, the more power the immortal artifact could exert. If a real heaven immortal used the spirit-restricting rope, even if Lu Buwei used the soul puppet to block a fatal disaster, he would still be captured alive by the spirit-restricting rope from thousands of miles away. An immortal artifact is very powerful, but it's not really as strong as an immortal. The spirit-restricting rope replied faintly, the reason why an immortal artifact is called an immortal artifact is that, in addition to the fact that the artifact's spirit has cultivated itself to become a spirit immortal, only an immortal can make an immortal artifact unleash its full power. Now, it's good enough that you can unleash 1/10,000th of my power. At least, you can imprison all cultivators below the heaven immortal realm. Even a 36th tier heaven immortal will be imprisoned by me for a period of time if he is caught off guard. You should be content. Meanwhile, the emperors and ministers of the 6 states looked at each other without saying a word. They were all sly and cunning, like loaches smeared with oil. When they saw the line of words, they knew that Lu Buwei had been framed and made a scapegoat. But no one, including Yan Dan, said anything to defend Lu Buwei. They were happy to see this situation. Lu Buwei had become a stone to explore the way. The emperors and ministers of the 6 states wanted to use Lu Buwei to find out what the rules of the 2 immortal sects were like. While they were looking around, Yu Yao's voice was suddenly heard coming from above, "Don't talk about sisterhood. The heaven immortals from outer heavenly realms have come to Myriad Immortals' planet and lived a free and unfettered life for over 2,000 years. Now, another storm of blood is about to descend. From now on, we can only rely on ourselves to survive. If we can survive, we still have a chance to return to our clan. If we can't, we'll have to turn into ashes together with the people around us." Beneath the ground, Wu Qi's hair stood on end. Li Yueyan and the other 2 girls were sisters from the same clan. There was someone else behind them. Even Jiang Qingzi and Han Shao Immortal were controlled by someone when they intruded Myriad Immortals' planet. Perhaps this was what the saying, "One can control the clouds with one turn of the hand and rain with another," meant. But, what was that person trying to do? What did he, or she, want to do? Yu Yao, who was emanating a faint golden light and had a formation hovering behind her back, said coolly, "I found this garden in the general map of Tsang Ao Immortal Abode. It is the secret abode where Tsang Ao Immortal crafted magical items, so I came here to see if there are any good things left behind." Yuji sighed softly and said, "Sister, you are so heartless." It was not hard to imagine how many heroes and mighty warriors of the 6 dynasties were gathered here, and how great of a storm they would stir when they left Myriad Immortals' planet and entered the outer heavenly realms. Could it be that the person who brought Yan Dan and his company to Myriad Immortals' planet did not have some secret agreement with Yan Dan and his company? Why didn't we capture his true self? Wu Qi was not satisfied with the spirit-restricting rope. As an immortal item, it actually allowed Lu Buwei to escape with the help of a soul replacement puppet, which made Wu Qi feel a little resentful. An inexplicable sense of crisis suddenly struck them. Yu Yao's eyes shone with an eerie golden gleam as she gave the surroundings a glance. Meanwhile, the heaven immortals, together with the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties, had broken more and more restrictive spells in the immortal abode. Gradually, all the areas in the immortal abode were connected, and they found the corpses of the generals and cultivators of the 6 dynasties. The row of bloody words, "The killer was Lu Buwei." It infuriated the 6 great heavenly immortals and shocked them, and they were puzzled as to why Lu Buwei would do such a thing. Li Yueyan sighed faintly and said, "It's not that Sister Yu Yao is heartless, it's him, he is too heartless. Give us a little more time, let us cultivate to the realm of heaven immortal, and then let these heaven immortals from outer heavenly realms come to Myriad Immortals' planet." Not daring to stay in the pool for too long, Wu Qi, who sensed that his meridians were beginning to stiffen, carefully withdrew from the pool. Why did Tsang Ao Immortal Abode build such a gloomy pool? Puzzled, Wu Qi walked around in a circle, and in the end, he found a cauldron used for crafting items and a sealed earth core flame eye hidden under a layer of wisteria. Only then did he realize that the pool was used for quenching flames. However, As the earth core Yin energy had formed in the depth of the pool, he had no idea what grade of magical treasure was needed to withstand the frightening cold force. Wu Qi shook his head. He should be content with what he had. Even the spirit-restricting rope failed to restrain the soul replacement puppets. Hiding under the ground, Wu Qi's pupils constricted. Yu Tan. Li Yuan. Yu Tan. He nodded thoughtfully, then exercised the mystic eyes of universe and gave the surroundings a glance. This was the place where the master of Tsang Ao immortal abode used to craft items. Therefore, regardless of whether it was a finished product or a half-finished product, there should be some good stuff left behind. A bright gleam shone from Wu Qi's eyes. Wherever they passed, all the mud, sand, and rocks turned into transparent crystals, and could no longer block his sight. A gentle smile appeared on her face as she said, "Elder sister, you have the most profound cultivation base. If there are any good treasures here, why don't you leave them for me and Yu Tan? Elder sister, you were the one who loved us the most in those years. If there are any good treasures, I'm sure you will leave them for us, right?" Immediately after that, a large sheet of golden light burst out from the entrance of the parterre, as Yu Yao, clad in a black palace dress and looking graceful and luxurious, pushed open the front door and walked slowly into the parterre. After that, a large patch of wisteria on the west side of the parterre, together with a layer of restrictive spells, was chopped off by an extremely sharp blade energy. Holding the crescent blade in her hand, Li Yuan ran into the parterre with a charming smile on her face. Angrily, Wu Qi stared at the spot where Lu Buwei disappeared, then flicked the spirit-restricting rope. Although he had used his innate energy to protect his body, he still could not withstand the cold energy. Wu Qi was struck with terror. There is someone else here. After retracting the celestial fiend puppets into his body, Wu Qi transformed into a stream of yellow mist and shot into the spirit pills pavilion. As he expected, all the spirit pills in the pavilion had decayed and turned into ashes, leaving nothing useful behind. However, he managed to collect several thousand pill bottles of various colors that could store spirit pills. After being nourished by the rich immortal energy in the pavilion, the quality of these pill bottles had improved by leaps and bounds compared to 2 eons ago. Perhaps even supreme-grade spirit pills could now be stored in them easily. The dark green water in the pond had accumulated the Yin energy from underground for 2 eons ago, and right at the bottom of the pond, it had already condensed into a nearly tangible Yin energy. The greenish Yin energy had taken the shape of a human and was shuttling back and forth in the depths of the pond. Wherever it went, it would bring forth a threatening cold air. A Yin energy stream drifted several tens of feet away from Wu Qi, and the bitter cold air that suddenly gushed out from it made Wu Qi shudder, while a layer of white frost appeared on his brows and hair. Chapter 303. Upon hearing Yu Yao's words, Wu Qi's heart gave a jerk. What was the origin of the golden gleam in her eyes? Why did it give Wu Qi a strange sense of threat? Not daring to stay any longer, Wu Qi twisted his body, transformed into a stream of yellow mist, and sped away. The golden gleam in Yu Yao's eyes almost brushed past his body and shone into the ground. After wandering for some time underground, Wu Qi found a sealed abode and emerged from the courtyard. He exercised his cultivation technique and forced out a great amount of sweat, then sprinkled some dust on himself to make himself look more miserable. His hair was messed up, and he casually summoned a few thunderbolts to strike his head. With that, Wu Qi dressed himself up even more miserably than a beggar on the street. He fished out a storage bracelet which he found in the residence of one of Tsang Ao Immortal Abode's disciples. He stuffed some rare metals that could be preserved for a long time into ingots, some pill bottles and a few pill formulas he found in the spirit pills pavilion into the bracelet. After that, Wu Qi deactivated the restrictive spells in a few rooms in the abode, then took out a large number of low-grade talismans, including explosive talismans, and threw them everywhere. Suddenly, a thunderbolt flashed above the abode, as a vast immortal energy shattered all the restrictive spells around the abode like a hot knife through butter. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other heaven immortals, together with the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties, and their disciples, rushed into the abode which occupied a very large area. Therefore, everyone saw Wu Qi, who was covered in filth and looked extremely disheveled, and was reeking of sweat. He was waving his arms and throwing all sorts of spirit talismans in all directions, while yelling and yelling, unleashing a great number of fireballs and lightning bolts to attack all kinds of restrictive spells in the abode. However, the restrictive spells in the abode were very strong, and the talismans unleashed by Wu Qi could only make them ripple and ripple, but did not cause any substantial damage to them. Patriarch Jiang Yun cleared his throat and cried out loudly, "Wu Qi!" Wu Qi, whose eyes were unfocused and who seemed to have lost his mind, turned around, blankly. He forgot to throw out the explosive talisman in his hand, and it exploded right in front of his chest. A ball of flame burst out, and Wu Qi's clothes were disheveled by the explosion. While coughing blood, he scrambled to his feet and came before Patriarch Jiang Yun. He grabbed Patriarch Jiang Yun's sleeve and howled, "Master, this damned place is haunted by ghosts. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get out of this courtyard. I used a lot of talismans to open a few rooms and found these things." Trembling, Wu Qi raised his hand and gave the light blue bracelet to Patriarch Jiang Yun. Using a technique learned from Scroll of Stealing, Wu Qi had enchanted the bracelet with a few exquisite defensive mechanisms, though their power was only equivalent to the limit of Jin Dan realm cultivators. Patriarch Jiang Yun took over the storage bracelet and scanned the restrictive spells on it with his divine will. He could not help but exclaim in surprise, "Eh? So, this is a restrictive technique from the ancient times? Amazing! There are so many talented people hiding in this Tsang-ao immortal abode. The restrictive spells on this little bracelet are already extremely profound. I have a deep understanding of them." He gave the bracelet to Bai Xia, Qing Wu, Qing Xian, and a few other heaven immortals, who all clicked their tongues and marveled at it. The restrictive techniques found in Scroll of Stealing were ancient and profound, and they were the products of a completely different system from the restrictive techniques that Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others had come into contact with. But, the few small restrictive spells that Wu Qi had casually enchanted had greatly amazed Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others, as they had learned a lot from them by analogy. In front of everyone, Patriarch Jiang Yun casually sent a stream of immortal energy into the bracelet. The restrictive spells cast by Wu Qi were very profound, but their power was not very strong. As soon as Patriarch Jiang Yun's immortal energy rushed into them, they disintegrated instantly. Patriarch Jiang Yun smiled at Wu Qi and said, "This restrictive spell is very profound, and it is reasonable that you can't break it, Wu Qi. Let's see what good stuff you have found in here." With a wave of his hand, a large number of items shot out from the bracelet. Rare metal ingots that piled up like a small hill were lying on the ground, glinting brilliantly, while nearly 100 pill bottles of very high quality were emitting a beautiful glow that could captivate one's soul. An astonishing amount of metal ingots, and nearly 100 pill bottles of amazing quality. But, when Wu Qi threw a few pill formulas into the bracelet after memorizing them, Patriarch Jiang Yun's eyes suddenly lit up. He snatched the few pill formulas recorded on the leaves of the evergreen tree and gave them a quick glance. Then, he could not help but make some gestures with his right hand in the air. No one dared to make a sound, and they all looked at Patriarch Jiang Yun cautiously. Qing Xian and the other old Taoists dared not to make any noise either. Patriarch Jiang Yun was a top-notch grandmaster alchemist in Liyuan Galaxy, and if he could find a few good pill formulas in this place, it would bring great benefits to Tranquil Vimla sect. After pondering for a full 15 minutes, Patriarch Jiang Yun breathed out a long sigh and said, "Marvelous, and thought-provoking. There are 7 pill formulas here, and no matter it is the ingredients or the method of concocting, they are completely different from the current Tao of alchemy. TSK, although this Tsang-ao immortal has an ordinary cultivation base, he must be the disciple of some mighty immortal, since he has such exquisite pill formulas." Daoist Qing Xian looked at Patriarch Jiang Yun and asked, "How is the effect of these pills?" Patriarch Jiang Yun looked at Daoist Qing Xian, smiled and said, "If we can successfully concoct 1 or 2 of these pills, we will have a few more heaven immortals under our sections. At that point of time, we will be considered as one of the few formidable immortal sects in Minor Heavenly Circle realm." Daoist Qing Xian and his brothers were struck with wild joy, while Bai Xia and Qing Wu could not help but smile, nodding their heads as they looked at Wu Qi. Patriarch Jiang Yun even personally helped Wu Qi to his feet, then gave Wu Qi a few bottles of healing spirit pills which he personally concocted. "My good disciple, you have made a great contribution again this time. He, you are the most loyal disciple to your sect." Patriarch Jiang Yun gave the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties a cold glance, breathed out a long sigh, and said, well, I won't force you to hand over those spirit herbs and immortal herbs. That's all I have to say. Both White Cloud Immortals sect and Tranquil Vimla sect will build our foundation on Myriad Immortals planet, and all of you will be our outer sect disciples. When there is a heaven immortal among you, you can establish your own sect. When he said that, Patriarch Jiang Yun had a complicated expression on his face. The faces of Yan Dan and the other emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties were extremely unsightly as well. They exchanged a glance, then bowed deeply to Patriarch Jiang Yun and Daoist Qing Xian together, but none of them said a word. Wu Qi gave Patriarch Jiang Yun a bewildered look, then turned to look at Yan Dan and the others. He blinked his eyes and asked in a low voice, "Master, what is going on?" Patriarch Jiang Yun shook his head and did not say anything. Daoist Qing Xian sighed and did not say anything either. As for the other 4 heaven immortals, they kept their mouths shut, and none of them said a word. As if he sensed that the atmosphere was not right, Wu Qi sneaked into the crowd of Great Yan's ministers. He came next to Lu Qingfeng and whispered something to Lu Qingfeng. Cautiously, Lu Qingfeng glanced at the people around him, then transmitted his voice to Wu Qi and explained what happened before they came to this abode. In the Tsang-Ao immortal abode, all the spirit herbs that could be harvested had been taken away by someone. The 6 heaven immortals brought their disciples and opened up many regions of the immortal abode. But, they did not find anything of value in those regions. Some of the spirit herbs and other valuable items were taken away by the disciples of the 2 immortal sections. These Taoists obediently took away their share, then offered the rest of the treasures to their sections. As for the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties, the spirit herbs, and all sorts of rare items they offered were nearly zero. Yan Dan, Yingzheng, and the others swore that they did not find any spirit herbs or treasures of great quality, and that was why they had nothing to offer to the 2 immortal sections. Meanwhile, the other ministers and generals of 6 dynasties also gave the same confession, saying that they did not find anything of value in the immortal abode. Unfortunately, in the immortal abode where these ministers and generals were staying, some of the rare spirit herbs in the flower beds and seedling gardens had long been harvested. According to the estimation of Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others, with so many spirit herbs in these gardens, even if they were evenly distributed to the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties who entered the immortal abode, they should still offer an astonishing amount of spirit herbs to their sections. But, the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties did not offer any treasures to their sections. Wu Qi shook his head silently, wearing a bitter expression. But in his heart, he was overjoyed. The blame was firmly placed on these people. Who would believe that it was he, Wu Qi, who had harvested so many spirit herbs in advance? Just a moment ago, when he was trapped in this abode and could not leave, there was no way that he, Wu Qi, was the one who harvested those spirit herbs. Be it Patriarch Jiang Yun, the other heaven immortals, or even all the people present, they would only suspect that it was a power from a certain dynasty or a few dynasties who had secretly harvested a great number of spirit herbs in advance, consuming them in secret, or doing some other shady business. They would never think that it was Wu Qi who did all this. These spirit herbs left behind from 2 great apocalypses were rare treasures even in Myriad Immortals planet, and now, they had all become Wu Qi's private collection. Seeing Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng whispering to each other, Patriarch Jiang Yun shook his head again. He exchanged a glance with the few heaven immortals, then reiterated, "Well, this matter ends here. In the future, all of you will be the outer sect disciples of White Cloud Immortals sect and Tranquil Vimla sect. Once you have achieved a certain level of development, you can establish your own sections. In the future, if all of you prosper, don't forget this incense stick of love." The emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties exchanged a glance. Since Patriarch Jiang Yun had made his words so clear, they bowed deeply once again and still did not say a word. Wu Qi rejoiced once again. If not for the fact that Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other immortals from the Righteous League were too embarrassed to offend them, and if it were Zhenmu's sovereign and the other immortals, perhaps they would have long killed Yan Dan and the others, robbing all their storage rings. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others were immortals from the Righteous Tao, and they would never do something so cruel and shameless. Therefore, they did not resort to extreme measures against Yan Dan and his companions. But, these 6 old immortals were not stupid. They suspected that the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties had embezzled a great amount of spirit herbs. Even though they could not use violence to force them to hand over the spirit herbs, they would never treat the people of 6 dynasties sincerely again. Outer sect disciples were just disciples who only had a title, and were left to fend for themselves in the future. As for Wu Qi, he had contributed a great deal in a row, and had even contributed a great amount of rare metals, pill bottles, and pill formulas. Obviously, his status in White Cloud Immortal sect was now equal to that of a core disciple like Jiang Qingzi. Looking at the silent outer sect disciples of 6 dynasties, Wu Qi felt a great joy blossoming in his heart. With this, Patriarch Jiang Yun would definitely side with him, and those enemies of his would have to be extra careful. How could a core disciple and an outer sect disciple be mentioned in the same breath? A light cough was heard, as Gigazi walked out from the crowd. Cupping his fist, he said, "Greetings, immortal masters." Wu Qi was taken aback. What was this old mister trying to say? Chapter 304. Fortunately, Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others were not interested in listening to what Gigazi had to say. They waved their hands and sent Gigazi back into the crowd with a gentle force. Daoist Qing Xian sighed and said, "We came from the outside world and seized your foundation. It is reasonable for you to hold a grudge against us. As for what happened in this immortal abode, we won't hold it against you. You are now our outer sect disciples. From now on, you better behave yourselves. Jiang Yun, you're leaving now." Patriarch Jiang Yun nodded, spun, and left the immortal abode with a few heaven immortals, together with many disciples who did not have much harvest. After the trip to Tsang Ao immortal abode, as he was greatly disappointed with these cheap disciples of the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties, Patriarch Jiang Yun let go of the case of Lu Buwei's murderer, and did not investigate further. The people of the 6 dynasties were very interested in the person who framed Lu Buwei's murderer. But, that was not enough to put the blame on Wu Qi. No one could have thought that the person who framed Lu Buwei's murderer was actually Wu Qi, who was only at the Jin Dan realm. In the blink of an eye, White Cloud Immortal sect and Tranquil Vimla sect had established their own immortal abodes on Myriad Immortals planet for over 3 years. During this time, Wu Qi had carefully stored all the various spirit herbs he found in the immortal abode with restrictive spells. As for the extremely precious heavenly wit fruit, he had only secretly fed one to Princess Zhang Lu and Lu Qingfeng, allowing both of them to have their intelligence greatly improved and their ability to merge with the heavenly Tao by a few times. Apart from these 2 heavenly wit fruits, he carefully stored all the other imperial advisors, not daring to waste any of them. During this time, Patriarch Jiang Yun had successfully concocted a cauldron of immortal pills, the thunder-calming dipper realm, according to the pill formula provided by Wu Qi. With 12 immortal pills in one cauldron, 12 disciples from White Cloud Immortal sect and Tranquil Vimla sect, who had been stuck at peak stage nascent dipper realm for nearly 10,000 years, and dared not to transcend their thunder tribulations, had successfully transcended their tribulation. With the addition of 6 heaven immortals, both immortal sects had a great momentum. 2 great immortal sects and 18 heavenly immortals. This made the 2 great immortal sects ranked within the top 10 in the entire minor heavenly circle realm. However, under Patriarch Jiang Yun's suggestion, the 12 newly promoted heaven immortals were not exposed to the public. In these 3 years, Wu Qi wholeheartedly cultivated in seclusion, throwing all the miscellaneous affairs to the people around him to handle. With Lu Qingfeng taking care of the affairs in Meng Mountains, Lu Ziyuan taking care of the affairs in Star Picking City, and Hai Yuntian taking care of the sales of the rare products in Star Picking Pavilion, Wu Qi's wealth was increasing at an incredible rate, and the power under him had also achieved some success. Every now and then, Wu Qi would head to White Cloud Planet through the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation and spend some time with Princess Zhanglu, who was cultivating on Spirit Cloud Peak. During these 3 years, Wu Qi had solidified his foundation, but his cultivation base did not improve by much. On the other hand, for some unknown reason, Princess Zhang Li's cultivation base had improved by leaps and bounds, breaking through from the peak of Golden Dan Realm to nascent Soul Realm in one fell swoop. With such an incredible cultivation speed and outstanding talent, Princess Zhanglu had gained the special favor of Bai Xia and Qing Wu, 2 great heaven immortals, and had become a core disciple of White Cloud Immortal sect who played an important role. During these 3 years, Wu Qi had lived a very comfortable and carefree life. Because he had White Cloud Immortal sect as his backer, Lu Buwei and the others had temporarily stopped scheming against him. Before they gained sufficient overall strength, no one dared to touch even a single hair on Wu Qi's head. Therefore, his days were extremely carefree. On this very day, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu were hunting a few fierce tigers at a stream near the back mountain of Spirit Cloud Peak. While they were feeding Gold Horn and Silver Horn, a sword beam descended from the sky and hovered before Wu Qi. Wu Qi reached out his hand and plucked a jade slip from the sword beam, then sent his divine will into it. He could not help but sigh and shake his head. Princess Zhanglu, who was holding a bloody tiger's thigh in her hand and teasing Gold Horn and Silver Horn, turned her head and asked curiously, "What's the matter?" Wu Qi whistled, making Gold Horn and Silver Horn twist their huge bodies and squeeze into the spirit breeding ring. Then, he nodded and said with a smile, "There is something. The leader of Discipline Hall has asked me to meet him. It seems he needs my help with something. Zi Xian, stay here and focus on your cultivation. Don't bully those junior sisters from the same sect." Princess Zhanglu leaped forward, grabbed Wu Qi's shoulder and cried out, "Are you going to sneak out alone again?" "No way." Rubbing Princess Zhang Li's long hair, Wu Qi smiled and said, "Have you forgotten what I told you? When you ascend and become a heaven immortal, you can follow me everywhere. At that time, I'll need your protection." Pouting, Princess Zhanglu let out a long sigh resentfully and said, "Then, you can go now. Be careful." Rolling her eyes, Princess Zhanglu suddenly threw out a bolt of lightning from her hand, causing the branches and leaves of a shrub in the distance to scatter. 2 little Taoist nuns, clad in green Taoist robes and with their hair tied into buns, screamed and leaped to their feet, waving their arms and legs as they ran backward. Princess Zhanglu laughed and said, Bai Lu, ha ha ha, I've caught you again. Come, I'll teach you how to use the 5 Thunders curse. Teach me by example, teach me by example." After letting out a few loud cries, a 5-colored cloud rushed out from under Princess Zhang Li's feet, carrying her up as she chased after the 2 little Taoist nuns. Amidst the sizzling noises, a great number of hair-thin lightning bolts smashed towards the 2 little Taoist nuns, scaring them so much that they shrieked and screamed. Hastily exercising their movement techniques, they fled in all directions while begging Princess Zhanglu for mercy. Ugh! Wu Qi shook his head helplessly. Well, it was a good thing to have a few unlucky fellows being bullied by Princess Zhanglu. Without any mercy, Wu Qi gave the 2 unlucky little Taoist nuns a look, then leaped into a sword beam and sped towards the Discipline Palace, which was located halfway up the Thousand Clouds Peak, the front mountain of White Cloud Immortal sect. The Discipline Palace was in charge of the rules and regulations of White Cloud Immortal sect. It was responsible for inspecting and reviewing the rewards and punishments of all the disciples in the sect. It was also responsible for determining the contribution each disciple made to White Cloud Immortal sect every year, and the amount of cultivation resources that disciple would be allocated in the following year. Therefore, the Discipline Palace was the most important palace among all the administrative palaces in White Cloud Immortal sect, and the leader of the Discipline Palace was the disciple with the highest authority in White Cloud Immortal sect, apart from the chief supervisor and the chief supervisor. similar to the architectural style of all the departments under the heaven that were in charge of discipline and supervision. The discipline palace of White Cloud Immortal sect had a gray and gloomy exterior. It was a square and flat hall that looked like a cage, lying flat on a piece of flat land that was excavated by manpower halfway up the Thousand Clouds Peak. When Wu Qi flew into the discipline palace, he saw Jiang Qingzi, clad in a blood-red Daoist robe unique to the leader of discipline palace, sitting in the great hall with a frown on his face. When he saw Wu Qi come in, Jiang Qingzi's expression turned slightly better. Without hesitation, he rose to his feet and walked towards Wu Qi, grabbing Wu Qi's hand and said, "Junior brother Wu Qi, I need your help to save my life. There is an errand here, and only you can do it." 3 years ago, because of Jiang Qingzi's contribution in discovering Myriad Immortals' planet, he was relieved from the post of Spirit Gathering Palace's leader, which was filled with many tasks and dangerous, and was promoted to be the leader of Discipline Palace. The position of Discipline Palace was very high and powerful, as it was responsible for supervising all the disciples in White Cloud Immortal sect. However, it did not have any troublesome tasks, and the resources it enjoyed were extremely generous. It was indeed one of the few lucrative jobs in White Cloud Immortal sect. Wu Qi exchanged some pleasantries with Jiang Qingzi, asking about his health, the safety of his family, the safety of the yellow dog and the toad, and some other nonsense. Jiang Qingzi, who rolled his eyes at Wu Qi's nonsense, gave a wry smile and quickly interrupted Wu Qi's chatter. All right. Junior brother, quickly complete this errand, and I'll give you a generous amount of sect contribution points." Wu Qi rolled his eyes and gave Jiang Qingzi a look. Laughing strangely, he said, "Senior brother, you should know that this little bit of sect contribution points is not important to me. I have a brother who is the chief supervisor of White Cloud Immortal sect's mines. What do I need this sect contribution points for?" Jiang Qingzi smiled bitterly and helplessly. He pointed at the empty discipline palace and said, "Well then, I'll owe you a favor. What do you think? You've seen it, over the past 2 years, more and more executing disciples in Discipline Palace have entered secluded cultivation, and fewer are willing to go out to run errands. If this continues, Discipline Palace will become an empty shell." Humbly and carefully, Jiang Qingzi smiled bitterly and said, "Recently, senior brother has to sort out the files of all the disciples in this year's examination. That's why I can't do anything else. As for the other executing disciples, they are either in secluded cultivation, or have other important tasks. I can only ask for your help, junior brother." Looking at Jiang Qingzi's expression, Wu Qi shook his head, sighed and said, "All right. Remember, senior brother, you owe me a favor." "Hee, compared to the favor you owe me, the sect contribution points are nothing. In the future, if I do anything that violates the sect rules, senior brother, you must remember this favor." Jiang Qingzi rolled his eyes and ignored Wu Qi. Then, he spun and picked up a roll of pale yellow documents from the table, handed it over to Wu Qi, and said with a wry smile, "There are 13 continents in White Cloud Planet, and 784 dynasties of various sizes. All of them are vassals of our sect. Among them, the Gu Tai dynasty on Taiyuan continent is ranked the strongest among all dynasties in China, and many of the members of Gu Tai dynasty's imperial clan are our sect's disciples." Wu Qi took over the document and asked with a deep voice, "Is the matter of a dynasty in the mortal world worth making such a fuss over?" Jiang Qingzi shook his head and said with a wry smile, "The old emperor of Gu Tai dynasty is nearing the end of his lifespan, and he is a dying man. Currently, there are 8 princes fighting for the throne in the dynasty, and they are in a heated argument. These 8 princes are all the disciples of the elders of our sect, and we can't let them go too far." After a brief moment of pondering, Jiang Qingzi said, "Junior brother, can I trouble you to go to Gu Tai dynasty and secretly examine the reputation of these 8 disciples among the common people? Find out how they conduct themselves in the mortal world, and pick out a suitable one to ascend to the throne with the imperial edict of our sect." With a solemn expression, he warned, "The dynasties in the mortal world are the foundation of White Cloud Immortal sect. Those disciples with excellent innate talent are recruited through these dynasties. If a dynasty is in a mess, it will not be good for the development of our sect. Wu Qi shook his head silently. Only now did he realize that a sect of immortal cultivators like White Cloud Immortal Sect had to worry about the succession of the imperial power in the various vassal states. With over 700 vassal states, the affairs in different realms were very complicated. It was no wonder that the discipline hall was short of manpower. After receiving the official document and some medallions, imperial edict, and other necessary items given by Jiang Qingzi, Wu Qi laughed and invited Jiang Qingzi to his star-picking city. After that, he transformed into a stream of light and flew towards the direction of Tai City, the capital of Gu Tai dynasty, according to the official document. White Cloud Planet could only be considered as an ordinary planet, far smaller than Myriad Immortals Planet. The planet had a diameter of about 34,000 kilometers, and Taiyuan Continent and White Cloud Immortals Sect's headquarters were right across the planet. After traveling several tens of thousands of miles, Wu Qi finally arrived at Taiyuan Continent, and found the capital city of Gu Tai dynasty, Tai City. Looking from afar, Tai City's scale was far smaller than Ji City. Measuring less than 30 miles in both width and length, it was not even as grand and magnificent as Wu Qi's star-picking city. However, as it was the ancient capital of a dynasty with a history of several tens of thousands of years, the buildings in Tai City were simple and elegant, giving off an air of elegance and nobility. The sky above Tai City was enshrouded in a layer of purple mist, from which a faint auspicious glow could be seen. Sure enough, it was the capital of a dynasty, and it was not to be underestimated. However, when Wu Qi peered into the distance with the mystic eyes of universe, he was shocked to see a few faintly discernible demonic energies lingering amidst the auspicious purple mist. The demonic energies were very faint, and if not for Wu Qi cultivating the mystic eyes of universe, he would not have been able to see them. The demonic energies gave Wu Qi a very familiar feeling, Wu Qi pondered and thought, could it be that some old acquaintances are stirring up trouble here? According to the character of those people, it was about time for them to strike and stir up some trouble. Shaking his head, Wu Qi descended 30 miles away from the city, changed into a luxurious robe with wide sleeves, and walked towards Tai City in a swagger. The closer he got to Tai City, the more Wu Qi found that the auspicious purple clouds above the city looked messy, as if they were completely twisted by some external force. Chapter 305. Raising his head, Wu Qi gazed at the aura hovering above the city, then walked into Tai City. After several tens of thousands of years of wind and rain, the city wall of Tai City was still the same as when it was first built. The bronze-colored city wall was emitting a soft and heavy glow under the sunlight, and traces of restrictive runes could be vaguely seen on every brick. As the capital city of the strongest kingdom ruled by White Cloud Immortal Sect, Tai City's defense was a few times stronger than that of Ji City. Only a heaven immortal wielding an immortal item could break into the city. Wu Qi swaggered into Tai City through the city gate while laughing merrily, pretending to be a libertine. When he entered the city, he immediately noticed that the atmosphere here was not right. The pedestrians and coaches entering and exiting the city were all in a hurry, their faces filled with panic and even despair. The soldiers and guards near the city gate were also on tenterhooks, like birds startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. They did not even notice that Wu Qi was walking past them. Shaking his head and frowning, Wu Qi entered the city and glanced around. Coincidentally, there was a coach waiting for customers near the city gate. Wu Qi waved his hand at the coach, then casually threw a refined gold ingot over and said, "The best and busiest brothel in the city. Send me there." Gold and silver were the common currency used by mortals everywhere, and it was no exception in Liyuan Galaxy. The only question was how much they were worth. The gold ingot Wu Qi threw over was refined by a Jin Dan human immortal using his alchemic flame. It was a pure gold ingot without any impurities. It weighed about half a kilogram, and it made the coachman beam with joy. Without hesitation, he drove the coach to greet Wu Qi. After boarding the coach and letting the coachman drive it forward, Wu Qi said coolly, "Remember, it must be the best brothel, but it must be the busiest brothel. Don't bring me to those private courtyards where you can listen to a girl playing a zither under a banana leaf. Livelier, it must be livelier. It must have a very large hall, a very large courtyard, and at least a few hundred patrons can drink and listen to music together. The coachman turned around and gave Wuqi a surprised look, then hurriedly nodded and said with a smile, "As you wish." The best, the liveliest brothel is the Hidden Sword Pavilion in Tai City. It is the liveliest, biggest, and best brothel. The burly man laughed apologetically and said, "Tai City also has that kind of small courtyard with its own entrance. It's called Little Yuan Villa. The girls there are all top-notch, each of them is an outstanding beauty. Are you sure you don't want to go?" Wuqi shook his head. He really didn't want to go to such a clean and upscale place. The mission given to him by Jiangqingzi was to find out which of the 8 princes of Gu Tai dynasty had the best character, and was the most suitable one to inherit the throne. In order to obtain such information, he naturally had to go to the most well-informed place. Where in the world could there be a more lively and well-informed place than a big brothel? On the contrary, a place that looked like a private clubhouse was not what he wanted. Sitting in the coach, Wuqi looked around through the window of the coach. Tai City was magnificent, yet dignified, simple, and elegant. When Wuqi scanned through the signboards of those shops that sold daily necessities, rice, cooking oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea, he found that they were all antiques that were at least 1,000 years old. It was not hard to tell how long the history of these shops was. The stepping stones in front of these shops were all carved green bricks. They were very elegant and had a special charm to them. When Wuqi passed by a pharmacy, he saw a young servant, clad in a green outfit and a small hat. The boxes used to pack the herbs in this pharmacy were made from thin pieces of fragrant wood, and the surface was carved with patterns of hundreds of herbs. This was the most meticulous industry in Tai City. Wuqi nodded his head silently. This was indeed an ancient dynasty with the strongest national strength in White Cloud Planet. It had been established for several tens of thousands of years, and the elegance accumulated over these several tens of thousands of years was not something a city like G City could compare with. However, the pedestrians on the street, and the shopkeepers and waiters in the shops along the street, all had a terrified expression on their faces, as if the sky was about to collapse. A restless atmosphere filled the air. Everyone was like ants on a hot pan, feeling uneasy in their hearts. A disaster could come at any time, but where the disaster would come from, and what kind of disaster it would be, none of them knew. Everyone could only wait passively, waiting for the impending disaster to befall them. Frowning, Wuqi turned to the coachman and shouted, "Brother, please hurry up." The coachman turned around and said with a smile, "Don't worry, young master, I won't delay your business. Although this hidden sword court is open for guests during the day, the good ladies are all resting. During the day, Hidden Sword Court is just an ordinary restaurant. If you want to have fun, you'll have to wait until nightfall." "Is it a restaurant during the day?" "That is the place where rumors and slanders are the most common." Wuqi thought of something and threw another piece of gold at the coachman. "Cut the crap. What do I want to do? Do I need you to talk here? Hurry up and send me to the Hidden Sword Pavilion, I'll reward you when we reach there." He received 2 large pieces of gold in a row, a heavy pound of gold. This was an income that the coachman might not have even if he worked hard for a year. The coachman grinned from ear to ear. He hurriedly whipped the horse and drove the carriage forward. The 2 black horses that pulled the carriage seemed to feel their master's joy. They gathered their strength and galloped forward. The sound of their hooves was crisp, and they brought Wuqi along the main road. After walking for less than the time to drink a cup of tea, a hoarse cry suddenly came from a fork in the road, "Father, mother, help." The screams and the sounds of fighting came closer. Not long after, a dozen armored soldiers with ivory tags hanging from their waists forcefully dragged a girl who was about 12 or 13 years old. She was so beautiful that she looked like a little jade pendant. The girl struggled and screamed crazily, but how could she break free from the hands of the 2 armored soldiers who were grabbing her arms? Behind this group of people, a pair of well-dressed old men, supported by many servants and maids, cried and screamed as they chased after them. The coachman hurriedly pulled the reins and stopped the carriage. His voice suddenly carried an unconcealable fear. "Are the armored soldiers from the 8 royal families looking for girls again?" "Sigh, Master Hu and his family have been doing good deeds for generations, but they only have one son. It's not easy for this generation to have a son, and they even have a little daughter. How could they have their eyes on her?" The 2 old men, along with a group of servants and maids, staggered to catch up with this group of wolf-like armored soldiers. Suddenly, an angry roar came from behind them. "How dare you kidnap a girl in broad daylight? Even if you are the guards of the 8th prince's mansion, you can't do such a lawless thing." Following this shout, a young man of about 17 or 18 years of age, dressed in a long robe, with a deep gash on his head and his upper body covered in blood, rushed up with a wooden stick in his hand, straight at the armored soldiers with his eyes fixed on them. The coachman cried out in alarm, "Master Hu and his family's only son, Hu Xian. He is just a young scholar, how could he survive the torture of these people? It's over, Master Hu and his family are going to have no more descendants." Before his words could fade away, Hu Xian had already raised the wooden stick high up in the air and swung it down viciously towards those armored soldiers. One of the armored soldiers who brought up the rear laughed sinisterly, then casually drew his sword and swung it horizontally towards Hu Xian's waist. The natural energy in White Cloud Planet was less than 30% of that in Myriad Immortals Planet. Therefore, the cultivation speed of these warriors was not as fast as those in Myriad Immortals Planet. Among these armored soldiers, the strongest one only had a cultivation base of 30 years of Hotian realm, which was far from the situation in Myriad Immortals Planet where Xiantian warriors and peak-stage Hotian warriors could be found everywhere. Even so, a cultivation base of 30 years of Hotian realm was more than enough to deal with a weak scholar like Hu Xian. Wu Qi shook his head. With a flick of his finger, a gust of wind shot out and exploded into tens of tiny sword beams. The invisible sword beams tore through the air and produced a hissing noise. Suddenly, the bodies of the tens of armored soldiers who were laughing hideously turned stiff, as a thumb-sized hole was pierced through Chi-Chi's temple. Blood and brain matter sprayed out like a fountain. All the armored soldiers fell to the ground in a disorderly manner. Hu Xian's body was shivering with the wooden stick in his hand, and he stared blankly at the dead bodies for a while. Only then did he rush forward, pulling the girl who was so frightened that her body went limp, and cried out, "Dad, Mom, look. She's scared stiff." Meanwhile, the coachman cried out in panic, "It's over, it's over. Master Hu and his entire family are finished. The 8th prince controls the army of 300,000 soldiers around Tai City, and he holds a high position and great power. Now that all the armored soldiers in his mansion are killed here, Master Hu and his entire family are finished." Wu Qi stared blankly at the coachman, then asked like an idiot, "The 8th prince is committing all kinds of atrocities, but no one can stop him?" The coachman turned to look at Wu Qi and said with a wry smile, "Young master, haven't you heard about it? The 8th prince who controls the army." He paused, then his face turned blue. He shook his head and dared not to say another word. Looking at the dead bodies on the ground, he murmured under his breath, "I wonder which expert killed them, but Master Hu and his entire family are finished." Master Hu and his family hugged each other and wept bitterly, while the servants and serving ladies stared at the dead bodies in horror. Suddenly, some of the timid serving ladies also began to cry, and gradually, even the eyes of those servants began to turn red. Wu Qi shook his head and pondered for a brief moment. Then, he fished out a medallion from his storage ring, which represented his identity as a executing disciple of White Cloud Immortal Sect's Discipline Hall. Using a small concealment technique, he threw the medallion out. The heavy medallion landed right in the middle of the family of 4. Through voice transmission, Wu Qi said, "Hang this medallion in front of your house. Let's see who dares to touch even a single hair of your family. Don't worry, this matter is over." The 8th prince of Gutai dynasty. In his mind, Wu Qi had already sentenced him to death. A man like this should never be allowed to become the monarch of a dynasty. The family of four stared blankly at the white jade medallion on the ground. It was about the size of a palm, yet weighed several dozens of kilograms. Countless white clouds were engraved on its surface, and on the back of the medallion was the figure of an old man clad in a Taoist robe, sitting cross-legged. On the front of the medallion were 2 rows of large protruding characters: White Cloud Immortal Sect's Discipline Hall, Deacon Wu. Thud. The family of 4 kneeled on the ground, kowtowing to the sky and thanking Ji Hao. Relaxed smiles had already appeared on their faces. The mighty reputation of White Cloud Immortal Sect was heard by everyone in Gu Tai Dynasty. It was the sect leader of Gu Tai Dynasty, and most of the imperial clan members of Gu Tai Dynasty were White Cloud Immortal Sect's disciples. With the help of the Master Immortal from Discipline Hall, even if the 8th prince was killed, the matter would be over, let alone the death of a dozen of Prince Mansion's guards. Wu Qi shook his head. If he was forced to reveal his identity medallion so soon, he might inadvertently alert the enemy. Nevertheless, Wu Qi was never a man who followed the rules. Who said that only the princes and grandsons of Gu Tai Dynasty could become the new emperor? Wu Qi could tell that this master who was a good man, and he could also be the emperor. The coachman had a kind heart, and he was a good candidate to be the emperor as well. Damn it, I've bumped into you. If none of you is a good man, don't blame me for turning the world upside down. With his eyes narrowed, Wu Qi gave the coachman a forceful slap and said, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Where is Hidden Sword Pavilion? I've already had my meal, and I still need to have some fun tonight." The muscles on Wu Qi's face began to wiggle slowly. Using the mystic technique of changing one's appearance found in Scroll of Stealing, he made a slight adjustment to his appearance. Master Hu and his family of 4 stared at Wu Qi in astonishment, especially the beautiful and adorable teenage girl, who turned her head away in disgust. Going to a brothel in the middle of the day to have fun? This kind of prodigal son was extremely detestable. Chapter 306. Master Hu's family has been doing good deeds and accumulating virtues for generations, and it was the immortals who showed them mercy this time. Otherwise, how could they escape from this calamity? Along the way, the coachman kept talking about the scene where the armored soldiers had their heads pierced through, and their blood and brains splattered everywhere. He also kept praising those immortals for their great benevolence and righteousness, and how benevolent they were. He said that by helping Master Hu and his family, they were doing good deeds and accumulating virtues. Wu Qi crossed his legs lazily and said coolly, "If that is the case, doesn't that mean those 8 kings are good people who are doing good deeds and accumulating virtues? Not only that, they have also joined White Cloud Immortal Sect, cultivated some powerful divine abilities, and used them to bully the common people. Is this also their good deeds?" The coachman shut his mouth, not daring to answer Wu Qi's question. He did not have the courage to comment on the 8 kings who held the most power in Gu Tai Dynasty. Wu Qi smiled faintly and shook his head. This was the way of thinking among the common people. When those immortals who stood high above the masses were seized by a sudden impulse, they would casually save some common people who were facing a calamity. It was a great deed of accumulating virtues and would be praised by these common people for many years to come. However, they had forgotten that perhaps these immortals were the source of their suffering. At the very least, if not for the fact that all 8 kings possessed the cultivation base of early-stage nascent soul realm, which gave them the overall strength to do evil, how could they do such a thing to the common people? Breaking into a house and abducting a girl in broad daylight was not something an ordinary person could do. The coachman did not say a word. The coach moved forward slowly, while Wu Qi frowned, pondering the background of these 8 kings of Gu Tai Dynasty. They were the only 8 sons of the dying emperor of Gu Tai Dynasty. All of them had joined White Cloud Immortal Sect, cultivating some Tao, magic, and divine abilities. However, their foundations and talents were limited. After spending close to 2,000 years of bitter cultivation, they still could not break through the early stage of nascent soul. Obviously, there was no end to the great Tao. They could only return to the dynasty and fight for the throne. Even if they could not become divine immortals, they should at least sit on the dragon throne of the dynasty for 1,000 years and enjoy the addiction of being an emperor, right? It just so happened that their father, Emperor Yuanda, who was also an early-stage nascent soul cultivator, was nearing the end of his lifespan, and was bedridden with a serious illness. Seeing that he was about to die, the 8 princes immediately used their cultivation base and magical powers to rally their followers, trying to seize the throne in a chaotic manner. All 8 of them had similar cultivation bases, and the amount of support they received from White Cloud Immortal Sect was almost the same. Therefore, none of them had the absolute upper hand, and it had thrown the entire dynasty into a state of panic. All 8 of them had official titles in Gu Tai dynasty, such as the Prince of Hu State, Prince of Wei State, and many others. However, according to the custom, the common people of Gu Tai dynasty were ranked according to their ages, from the oldest to the youngest, the first king, the second king, all the way to the 8th king. Today, Wu Qi bumped into an armored soldier from the 8th king's mansion, who had abducted a girl on the street, and it seemed like it was not the first time he had done this. Without hesitation, Wu Qi had put him on the blacklist. How could a man like this want to be the emperor? Wu Qi did not mind chopping off his head and sending him to the netherworld to be the flat-top ghost king. Crossing one leg over the other, Wu Qi kept humming some obscene tunes from Lu Xiaobai's memory, such as the 18 Gropes. While humming, he came to the entrance of Hidden Sword Pavilion. The coachman frowned, turned to look at Wu Qi, smiled and said, "Young master, we've arrived at Hidden Sword Pavilion." Deep in the coachman's eyes, there was a hint of disdain that he was trying very hard to conceal. Dressed in luxurious clothes, with a handsome face, he was heading to a brothel at noon, and humming some obscene tunes along the way. If he was not a prodigal son, what else could he be? The coachman mingled in the marketplace, and he knew all the famous young masters and princes in Tai City. Judging from Wu Qi's appearance, he must be a wealthy young master from another place. It should be his first time coming to Tai City, yet he went straight to a brothel. What a prodigal son. The coachman thought to himself, if I have a child like this, I would have thrown him into a water tank and suffocated him to death. Wu Qi leaped off the coachman and casually tossed a few 1 caddy gold ingots into the coachman's arms. He turned around and grinned at the coachman. Believe it or not, the immortal master who kills people and saves people is none other than me. Ha! Shaking his head and letting out a loud laugh, Wu Qi suddenly took a step forward. With just one step, he crossed over 100 feet, then rushed into the main entrance of Hidden Sword Pavilion like a wisp of smoke. The coachman stared blankly at Wu Qi's back. His eyeballs nearly popped out from his eye sockets. He remained silent for a moment, then suddenly swung his whip and gave the back of the horse pulling the coachman. He murmured under his breath, "Damn it, I don't believe you. You are just a prodigal son who has been practicing martial arts for a few days. Do you think you are an immortal who can fool Lao Tzu? Bah! Is there an immortal like you? Your mouth is full of obscene words. Immortal? Bah!" Wu Qi fished out a folding fan from his storage ring, waving it all the way into Hidden Sword Pavilion. This Hidden Sword Pavilion truly deserved to be the largest and busiest brothel in Tai City. First of all, the gatehouse at the entrance was tall, imposing, and splendid. Like moving clouds and flowing water, Wu Qi glided into the gatehouse with one step. Coupled with his attire and the 2 jade pendants made from spirit jades hanging on his waist, which were worth at least 1 million gold ingots, the eyes of the pimps waiting in the gatehouse immediately lit up. One after another, they cried out loudly, "An honorable guest has arrived," while rushing to greet him in a flurry. Wu Qi waved his hand carelessly, throwing out several dozens of heavy gold ingots. He laughed and said, "My good grandsons, serve me well. I came here to make myself happy." He prepared a table of top-notch noodles, with 16 side dishes, 16 fruit platters, 16 cold dishes, 16 hot dishes, and 16 different kinds of top-notch wine. "Oh, don't use the little girl yet, I'll heat it up later in the evening. TSK, I'm in a good mood, so I'll reward whoever I see." Surrounded by a group of pimps, Wu Qi strode into Hidden Sword Pavilion. Along the way, no matter it was the servants who were sweeping the floor, the servant girls who were serving tea and water, and even a few lowly servants who were emptying the toilet bowls, Wu Qi would throw half a kilogram of gold ingots to them whenever he saw them. For a moment, the golden light flickered, and the pimps around Wu Qi were so happy that their teeth were cracking. A generous guest, an unprecedented generous guest, a generous guest who specialized in squandering money. They had to serve such a generous guest well. Even if Wu Qi kept scolding them as his good grandsons, they still had to serve him well, didn't they? Money, lots and lots of money, that was enough. Wu Qi took out so many gold ingots from a storage bag on his waist. The pimp's eyes lit up. To be able to use a storage bag, one had to be at least a Xiantian level cultivator. To be able to afford a storage bag, one had to be either an immortal cultivator or a direct descendant of a wealthy family. If they didn't serve such a generous guest well, they would be letting down their parents who raised them. Such a generous guest, they had to cut off a layer of his flesh. Surrounded by his entourage, Wu Qi walked all the way into Hidden Sword Pavilion and arrived at the main building in the middle of the pavilion. He followed the gold-inlaid jade steps all the way to the 4th floor of the main building. In the middle of the main building of Hidden Sword Pavilion, there was a 6-story patio, surrounded by corridors, and at the back of the patio were small, exquisite rooms. From the 1st floor to the 6th floor, the higher the floor, the fewer rooms there were, and the larger the area of the rooms. The maids who served the guests were also more beautiful and cute. Along the way, Wu Qi spent 200 to 300 pounds of gold, but he was only sent to a private room on the 4th floor of the main building. Wu Qi couldn't help but grimace. How much gold would he have to spend to get to the 6th floor of the main building? What kind of luxurious status did he have to have? He sat in the private room. The private room was big enough to hold 7 to 8 tables of banquets, and the furnishings were luxurious. All the utensils were made of exquisite brocade and fine porcelain, and the patterns on them were extremely beautiful and elegant. It didn't have the slightest bit of the ostentatious and obscene atmosphere of a brothel. The few maids who served in the private room were all delicate and pretty, and they had a strong scholarly air about them. They were not vulgar brothel girls. Wu Qi nodded to himself. He scanned the surroundings with his divine sense and immediately enveloped the entire main building. Apart from the top floor, which was the 6th floor, there were only a few private rooms, which were protected by restrictive spells that, in Wu Qi's opinion, could prevent others from eavesdropping. However, with his divine sense, the entire Hidden Sword Pavilion could be seen clearly by Wu Qi. In the hundreds of private rooms upstairs and downstairs, Wu Qi could clearly hear the conversations of over 2,000 diners who were having their meals. Wu Qi was lying crookedly on a chaise longue in the private room, his eyes narrowed as he enjoyed the gentle massage given by 2 serving ladies, while watching the serving ladies walking in and out of the room serving wine and delicacies to him at the same time. Over 2,000 people were talking noisily at the same time. If it were an ordinary person, there was no way he could figure out how many valuable words they were talking about. But to Wu Qi, who had formed his nascent divinity with the power of heavenly thunder, he could eavesdrop on the conversations of over 100,000 people at the same time, and he would not miss any valuable words. The guests who could come in and out of the Hidden Sword Pavilion were either rich or respectable people, and they were influential figures in Tai City. Some of them were powerful dragons who came from other places. When a group of men gathered together, with beautiful women to please their eyes, and fine wine to soothe their hearts, all kinds of strange words and deeds would come out of their mouths. Among them were some things that happened in Tai City recently. For example, the 8th prince had a few more distinguished guests in his mansion. In order to entertain them, the 8th prince was trying his best to search for some beautiful girls among the common people. For example, the 6th prince suddenly had a few beautiful concubines, each of whom was a supremely beautiful woman who could topple a kingdom or a city. Another example was that a certain eunuch in charge of the palace suddenly grew a beard. The eunuch in charge of the palace grew a beard was told by a few guests in the private rooms as a joke. No one believed it was true, and even the person who told the joke did not believe it himself. But Wu Qi believed it. A eunuch growing a beard. wasn't it just because that thing down there had been reborn? It was not impossible for a eunuch to have the ability to reborn that thing. Laughing coldly, Wu Qi rose to his feet. While eavesdropping on the conversations of these people, he picked up a wine pot from the table and walked to the veranda outside the private room. While looking at the scenery in the main building, he kept drinking the wine from the pot. Suddenly, he saw a row of wheels made of different materials placed on a high platform in the middle of the courtyard. Gold, silver, iron, stone, and wood, 5 wheels with a diameter of 3 feet were placed on the platform, looking very dazzling. Wu Qi was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly laughed. He pulled a maidservant behind him, pointed at the wheels and said, "Could it be that Hidden Sword Pavilion is also in the carriage business?" The maidservant laughed and winked at Wu Qi, then explained, "You must be joking, my dear customer. These wheels, hee." She smiled charmingly, blushed, and explained, "This is an entertainment that an important guest asked our master to place here. As long as any guest can use that thing of his to spin it, he or she will get a great benefit." Using that thing to spin the wheels. Would he be able to obtain great benefits? Wu Qi laughed. "Old Mr. Lao Ai, are you here to stir up trouble as well? Combined with those few familiar demon energies, hee." Wu Qi kept shaking his head and emptying the wine in the pot. Chapter 307. The pink light made one feel comfortable, and the faintly discernible scent of incense made one's bones feel like they were about to melt. Amidst the warm and gentle smiles of the serving ladies, Wu Qi was having fun with them. The excellent banquet was ruined beyond recognition, and unknowingly, he had drunk a few jars of fine wine. The fine wine of the brothel had always been like this. It was fragrant and rich, but not too high in alcohol content. This was reasonable. If the guests were all drunk, how could they have a good time at night? The fine wine of the brothel was just something to liven things up. Just like the girls in the brothel, they were gentle, sweet, and fragrant, but they could not be taken seriously. After drinking a few jars of fine wine, Wu Qi did not force out the smell of alcohol. He just sat in the private room, half drunk and half sober, laughing and joking with the group of maids. When he was in a good mood, Wu Qi would fabricate a story about how wealthy his father was, how many carriages he owned, and how many trading companies he owned. After that, he would reward these serving ladies with a large amount of money. He did not know how many gold ingots he had lost, but later on, Wu Qi began to throw pearls, precious stones, and beautiful jade to them. The manager of the Hidden Sword Court was also very straightforward. When the gold and jewels Wu Qi threw out reached a value of about 50,000 gold, a few girls who were even more beautiful than the maids beside Wu Qi floated into the private room. They warmly invited Wu Qi to a room on the 5th floor that was more luxuriously furnished and twice the size of the private room below. Another fine wine and dishes had already been prepared here. Whether it was the ingredients of the wine and dishes, or the control of the fire, they were all better than the banquet below. Not only that, the maids who served here had also reached the level of half a femme fatale. If they were outside, they would be enchanting enough to topple half a city. At the side of the room, behind a light gauze curtain, there were a few beautiful women sitting behind, playing a string instrument. The private room echoed with a faint, soft music, like the soft moans of a woman on a spring night. It was a pity that the Hidden Sword Court's meticulously designed gentle scene was completely different when it came to Wu Qi. Upon hearing the melodies that were filled with a strong sense of lust, Wu Qi instinctively thought of the scene in Meng Fortress, the scene where Xiong Qing brothers and a group of wild bear demons fought fiercely with those big she-bears while screaming at the top of their lungs. Countless hairy, pitch-black bodies suddenly appeared in front of Wu Qi. Wu Qi shuddered and instantly sobered up from the drunkenness. He shook his head and casually grabbed a handful of pearls, emeralds, and other treasures and threw them to a maid beside him. He sighed and said, "Come, play finger-guessing games with me for fun." The handmaidens of Hidden Sword Court have all received meticulous training. They are proficient in the 4 arts of the 4 arts. However, this kind of finger-guessing game that only Jianghu heroes are good at, was extremely difficult for them. dozens of charming handmaidens were knocked down by Wu Qi with a flurry of punches. After each of them was forced to drink a jar of wine, they rolled their eyes and fell onto the carpet. Wu Qi let out an evil laugh. He simply put one of his feet on the soft stool, humming a little tune while drinking by himself. He looked indescribably leisurely and carefree. Behind him, another group of handmaidens rushed over and helped those handmaidens who had fallen to the ground. However, when Wu Qi gave the order, these handmaidens had no choice but to line up those handmaidens who had fallen to the ground in a row on the carpet in the private room. It was a magnificent sight. Wu Qi laughed heartily. While looking at those handmaidens who stood beside him and served him with a strange expression on their faces, he looked at those handmaidens who were sleeping in a row on the floor that reeked of wine, and he kept drinking by himself. Only he knew the joy in doing so. After a round of fooling around, the sky outside had long turned dark. More and more guests swarmed into the hidden sword court, and even more gorgeously dressed young ladies swarmed into the private rooms to keep the guests company. Under the intoxication of beauty and fine wine, more and more reliable and unreliable rumors began to emerge from the mouths of the guests, including the matter of the 8th King's Mansion's armored soldiers being killed in the middle of the street. It was said that when the 8th prince heard that his trusted guards were killed, he was so furious that he personally led a large group of people and rushed to Uncle Hu's house to take revenge. However, not long after he entered the house, the 8th prince retreated with a pale face, and without saying a word, he fled back to his mansion with his tail between his legs. Wu Qi quietly listened to these useless rumors, and suddenly, a strange smile appeared on his face. The sound of footsteps rang out, and a large group of burly men dressed in purple-red brocade robes walked up the stairs. They set up a dense number of sentries on the veranda. After that, a few men with extraordinary auras slowly walked up the stairs, all the way to the largest private room on the highest floor above Wu Qi's. From where Wu Qi was standing, he could see a very spacious balcony in front of the private room. For a moment, the entire hidden sword court fell into a dead silence. Some of the guests who recognized the few men were murmuring something under their breath. From the murmuring, Wu Qi could tell that among the few men, the one with the most extraordinary aura was the 3rd prince of Gu Tai dynasty. He was in charge of the military headquarters of Gu Tai dynasty, and had a very deep foundation in the army. Half of the 4 border armies of Gu Tai dynasty were loyal to him. Among the few princes, only the 8th prince, who ruled the Tai city of Gu Tai dynasty and the few surrounding cities, had enough military strength to fight against the 3rd prince. These 2 princes were also the 2 princes who had the fiercest conflict. It was said that at the outskirts of a city in the northeast of Tai City, someone once saw 2 armies, also flying the banner of Gu Tai dynasty, fighting and killing each other. The battle was extremely brutal, and the number of casualties reached thousands. It was said that it was the trusted guards of these 2 princes who fought each other. The 3rd prince was a middle-aged man with a pale face and a gaunt face. He looked weak and lifeless, like a scholar. Only Wu Qi could see wisps of white mist hovering faintly on the surface of his body. It was a sign unique to the disciples of White Cloud Immortal sect. Their energies would transform into auspicious clouds and mist, and the stronger the cultivation base of a person was, the more eye-catching the clouds would be. For example, as Patriarch Jiang Yun possessed the cultivation base of Heaven Immortal, the clouds and mist around him had fused vaguely with the heaven and earth. Wherever he went, he would be surrounded by a vast ocean of clouds. Among the few men who came up with the 3rd prince just now, 2 of them looked rather familiar to Wu Qi. If Wu Qi was not mistaken, he had seen these 2 men among Great Zhao's emperors and ministers. They were not human beings, but demon cultivators. Similar to Xiong Wanling and the others, they were imperial advisors hired by Great Zhao, demon cultivators with the cultivation base of nascent divinity realm. However, Wu Qi could not remember their names and their cultivation base. Not long after that, another group of burly men clad in brocade robes came rushing up the stairs. They came next to the guards who came with the 3rd prince like they were familiar with the place, standing shoulder to shoulder with these guards and guarding all the vital spots in the upper and lower floors. Obviously, there was something wrong with the 2 groups of burly men. They stood shoulder to shoulder, bumping their shoulders against each other. For a moment, the entire hidden sword pavilion was filled with the sound of bodies slamming against each other. Those who did not know what was going on might think there were at least 100 couples fighting in this place. Following that, a few more men with extraordinary bearing came up the stairs. Wu Qi's eyes lit up abruptly. Among these few men, there were some old acquaintances of his. Xiang Ta and Xiang Zhuang from Great Chu were among them. From the whispers of the surrounding guests, Wu Qi could tell that the leader of these men was the 8th prince of Gu Tai dynasty, and the burly man walking side by side with him was none other than Xiang Yu. When Wu Qi saw Xiang Yu, he shrunk his neck instinctively. This fiend was not easy to deal with. If he found out that he was here, he would most likely draw out his sword and charge at him. Carefully, Wu Qi touched the black dragon spirit ring, prepared a few magical treasures, and placed the talismans given by Patriarch Jiang Yun in the most convenient place. Only then did he breathe out a sigh of relief, sitting in the room with a peace of mind and enjoying the show. Not long after that, another group of guards came rushing up the stairs. Similarly, they were guarding all the vital spots in the upper floors of Hidden Sword Pavilion. As a result, the sound of bodies slamming against each other grew louder and louder. The guards from 3 groups were exerting their hidden forces and slamming each other, nearly drawing their weapons and fighting each other. This time, it was the 6th prince of Gu Tai dynasty who came to the 6th floor. Following beside him was a charming lady. Wu Qi recognized her as the palace master of Enchanting Palace, Su Mei'er. Hugging Su Mei'er's waist and walking shoulder to shoulder with 6th prince, who else could it be but Lao Ai? Sighing lightly, Wu Qi shook his head. Sure enough, Su Mei'er and Lao Ai were in cahoots with each other. That made sense. As a pair of adulterers, it would be strange if they did not become a couple. Their cultivation techniques were simply a match made in heaven, and they should be a couple. However, as Su Mei'er had seized Ying Zheng's energy, she was now infinitely close to the realm of heaven immortal. Once Su Mei'er ascended to become an immortal, Lao Ai's backing would be even more secure. Lao Ai was the kind of person who would act arrogantly when he was pleased with himself. Once Su Mei'er ascended to become an immortal, there was no telling what Lao Ai would do. Speaking of transcending, Wu Qi suddenly frowned and shook his head in puzzlement. 12 peak stage nascent divinity disciples from White Cloud Immortals sect and Tranquil Vimla sect had transcended their thunder tribulations, becoming heaven immortals. Although the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties did not know about this, Wu Qi was very clear about it. But, why did these 12 newly promoted heaven immortals not transcend? But, how were they going to transcend? Where were they going to? Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others were heaven immortals as well. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi shook his head and said, there must be something behind this. I'll find out in the future. He looked at Su Mei'er maliciously. If Su Mei'er accidentally flew away from this place after passing the thunder tribulation and didn't come back for a long time, wouldn't Lao Ai lose both his wife and his army? Wouldn't that be a huge loss? While Wu Qi was wishing Lao Ai all the best, the 6th prince had already taken his seat in a private room on the 6th floor. The entire main building of Hidden Sword Pavilion fell into a dead silence. None of the guests from the 1st floor to the 6th floor dared to make a sound. Among the 8 princes who had stirred up a great uproar in Gu Tai dynasty recently, 3 of them had appeared in Hidden Sword Pavilion at the same time. If they were not careful, they would face the disaster of having their entire clan wiped out. Groups of serving ladies from Hidden Sword Pavilion were seen running back and forth in the corridors like butterflies fluttering among flowers, bringing all sorts of delicacies and fine wines into the 3 private rooms. All of a sudden, from the private room where the 8th prince was seated, a hoarse and deep voice that sounded like the clashing of metals rang out, "My brothers, what brings you here today? Could it be that you want to compete with me for the beauty being auctioned today?" From the 3rd prince's private room, a soft and feminine voice rang out, "Do as you please, I'm just here to watch the show." From the 6th prince's private room, a voice that sounded neither feminine nor masculine was heard, "8th prince, I've also taken a fancy to that lady from the Z clan." Who doesn't want such a beautiful and talented lady? The one who offers the highest price will get her, this is a matter of course. The eighth prince sneered. Just as he was about to say something, the soft and feminine voice of the third prince rang out again, listen up, this is Big Brother's territory, and there are rules set by him. We'll give him some face, and we'll follow the rules. The one who offers the highest price will get her. As for that lady from the Z clan, not only the two of you can bid for her, the rest of you can also bid for her. The sixth prince and the eighth prince did not say another word. The third prince chuckled, then said indifferently, everyone, according to the rules set by Big Brother, once you enter Hidden Sword Pavilion, you will be considered as a guest with equal status. Enjoy yourselves to your heart's content, and wait for the grand event tonight. The beloved daughter of the former heavenly official of the Ministry of Rights has been sold to prostitution, and the lady from the Z clan is a famous and talented lady in Gu Tai dynasty. Whoever is rich, just bring her home, and I, together with Big Brother, guarantee that no one will ever seek revenge on you after this. As soon as the third prince said that, a commotion broke out in Hidden Sword Pavilion. Cheers and the sound of people playing their fists rang out again, and it nearly blew the roof off. Chapter 308. When the pale-faced scholar walked down the high platform, several red ladies from Hidden Sword Pavilion greeted him with a gust of fragrant wind. They pulled him to a private room on the 4th floor. The scholar's success had brought the atmosphere to a boiling point. More and more experienced entertainers came up to the platform to give it a try, but most of them were defeated, and only a few of them could lift the wooden wheel. In the surrounding corridors, there were also guests enjoying the performance, drinking, and having fun with beautiful girls in their arms. When they saw the benefits, the guests threw out a large number of glittering gold pieces and silver coins. The performers on the high stage worked even harder to perform all kinds of thrilling tricks. The fire on the high stage shot out in all directions, and smoke lingered in the air. It was as if a demon had come into being. It was very exciting. Wu Qi furrowed his brows. Not only did this green-clothed servant have an ugly face, there was also a trace of madness in his eyes, which made Wu Qi dislike him. Every man for himself, and the heaven and earth destroy him, murmured Wu Qi. Shaking his head, he fished out a handful of rubies and sapphires and casually threw them down. These things could be found in carts under the East Sea of Myriad Immortals planet, and many of the underwater canyons were filled with these raw gemstones. It was easy for Wu Qi to get them, so he did not treat them as money. Cultivators only cared about energy stones, spirit pills, and all kinds of magical treasures. Gold and silver were nothing to them. All the guests in Hidden Sword Pavilion gasped at the same time, and then some of them laughed and cursed. Even if it was just a wooden wheel, it still weighed more than 100 kilograms. If an ordinary person was not careful enough, wouldn't that thing be torn apart? Wu Qi laughed as well, then fished out a few gold ingots and threw them down. He was on the 5th floor, and the ground was high to begin with. When the heavy gold ingots were thrown down, they hit the stone slabs on the 1st floor, scaring the servants who were picking up the silver ingots with baskets and scurrying away. All the people around them looked at them in surprise. Wu Qi chuckled awkwardly, glanced at the 3 private rooms on the 6th floor with the corner of his eyes, and made a decision in his mind. Lao Ai raised his brows and laughed, 9 dragons embracing jade stem, wonderful. I never thought there would be a treasure as good as mine in this world. Chuckling softly, the beautiful woman said with a gentle voice, honored guests, I, Qingyang, am here to greet you. Twisting her slender waist, she walked a few steps on the stage, then pointed at the 5 3-feet-wide wheels placed on the stage, smiled and said, I believe all of you have seen it. Why do you think we, the Hidden Sword Court, put 5 wheels here? Qingyang has something to say here. If any customer can use a yang object to spin these 5 wheels, they will receive great benefits. Countless guests and ladies cheered in unison, all of them laughing non-stop. However, the servant had already let out a loud roar. With all his strength, he lifted the golden wheel up, put it on his lower body, and spun the golden wheel with all his strength, making it spin slowly. This servant did not cultivate any internal energy cultivation technique. He was born with an innate divine strength, and with the help of a yang object, he had achieved a miracle that many warriors could not achieve. Regardless of whether these few princes were good or not, as long as they were in cahoots with the people of the 6 dynasties, none of them could be allowed to become the new emperor of Gu Tai dynasty. The new emperor must be someone that he, Wu Qi, would like, and the prerequisite for that was that the emperor could only be loyal to him, Wu Qi. All of a sudden, a loud laughter was heard coming from the front of one of the private rooms. A tall and burly man with about 40 years of internal energy jumped directly onto the stage from the veranda. As he took off his clothes, he laughed maniacally and said, "The reason we come here to have fun is because we want to have fun. Hee hee, it's not a shameful thing to show us. The fact that I can lift this will proves that I have an innate talent. When the ladies see me in the future, they will definitely look at me in a different light." According to Lao Ai's evaluation, this burly man was a one-headed dragon, the lowest grade yang object among all the 9 grade yang objects. It was not a good thing, but compared to ordinary people, it was still a pretty good treasure. He could lift a 300-kilogram wooden wheel, and more importantly, he had an internal energy cultivation base of 40 years. Otherwise, it would be rather difficult for him to spin the wheel. Immediately, all the guests in Hidden Sword Pavilion fell silent, lowering their heads and pondering. Everyone in Tai City knew that the owner behind Hidden Sword Pavilion was a supervisor in the first prince's mansion. To put it bluntly, Hidden Sword Pavilion was the business of the first prince. However, a brothel opened by a first prince did not have a good reputation, so it was placed under the name of a supervisor in the mansion. Which man in the romantic world could stand being ridiculed by outsiders in this aspect? Just as Qingyang was about to scold the servant, Lao Ai suddenly cried out, "Let him try. Kid, if you can lift a golden wheel, I'll take you as my disciple." Wu Qi raised his head and gave Lao Ai a glance, then gently shook his head. Could this old devil really find himself a disciple here? Sure enough, when the burly man tried to lift the 600-kilogram stone wheel, he failed completely, and nearly tore his lower body. Clutching his lower body in a sorry state, the burly man returned to the room where his friends were while laughing and laughing, amidst the praises of all the guests. After playing for a while, those acrobats walked down the stage, gasping for breath. After that, a beautiful woman, who was clad in a light green palace dress, walked slowly up the stage, looking graceful and luxurious like an imperial concubine. She gently and gracefully bowed to the people around her. The woman smiled and glanced around. Her eyes were as clear as water, and she looked right into everyone's eyes, making everyone feel that this beautiful woman was looking at them. A dead silence fell upon the crowd. Everyone recognized Lao Ai as the nobleman who came in with the 6th prince and walked side by side with the 6th prince. When he spoke, Qingyang respectfully retreated to the side. The green-clothed servant clenched his teeth and untied his belt, revealing a large, cumbersome object. Wu Qi crooked his finger and was about to shoot Madman Shui to death. While giggling, Qingyang told him the benefits of the stone wheel amidst the cheers of countless people. She said that once one could lift a stone wheel and spin it, he or she would enjoy a 30% discount in Hidden Sword Pavilion, and could even spend money in the backyard of Hidden Sword Pavilion, enjoying the most romantic and gentle treatment. Trembling, the servant placed the golden wheel on the stage, then dropped to his knees and kowtowed. "My surname is Shui, and I've never had a name since I was young. Because I fight without any regard for my life, they call me Madman." Qingyang said slowly, "This is a rule set by an honorable guest, and the master of Hidden Sword Pavilion found it interesting, so he set it up according to the law. Customers who can ride on the wooden wheels will receive a 20% discount when they come to our Hidden Sword Court in the future. They can even be accompanied by our Hidden Sword Court's Miss Hong. This is a treatment that many customers wish they could have." Wu Qi saw Lao Ai and Su Mei walk out of the room, and were examining the burly man on the veranda. Lao Ai's gaze was focused, as if he was an old pedant who was doing his research. He gestured to Su Mei, commenting on the color, volume, length, and veins of this burly man's lower body. Countless professional words came out of Lao Ai's mouth, and Wu Qi was amazed by what he heard. Wu Qi took a deep breath. There's really someone who dares to do this. For cultivators, this was nothing. After all, their fleshly bodies were tempered by natural energies day and night, which made them much stronger than ordinary people. But for ordinary people, it was just too difficult to lift a stone wheel and spin it. Wu Qi scanned the 5 wheels with his divine sense, and found that they were all specially made. Even the lightest wooden wheel weighed 300 pounds. The heaviest golden wheel weighed 1,600 pounds. Wu Qi looked down at the excited guests on the veranda from above, and he could not help but shake his head and sneer. On the platform in the middle of the huge courtyard that measured 1,000 feet in both width and length, a group of acrobats began to perform all kinds of strange tricks. Carrying a jar of wine, Wu Qi walked out of the room and stood on the veranda, looking down at the acrobats' performance. They were throwing fireballs, throwing ropes, throwing knives, and many other tricks. Wu Qi watched with great interest, and kept cheering. Qingyang covered her little mouth with her sleeve, giggled softly and said, "You're right, sir. As long as you can lift a wheel, you'll be an absolute hero. In the future, all of Qingyang's daughters will love you dearly. This is a great deal to make a name for yourself. Sir, you must work hard and lift a few more wheels." Inside Hidden Sword Court, thousands of guests were drinking to their heart's content. Leaning against a soft stool, Wu Qi deftly used his divine sense to penetrate the low-quality restrictive spells outside the few private rooms upstairs, and eavesdropped on the conversations inside. But, it was a pity that the private room was also filled with the chatter of young women. None of the 3 princes or the people around them were talking about anything serious. After listening for a while, Wu Qi felt bored, so he shook his head and retracted his divine will. Those who could lift a wheel could enjoy a 50% discount, and they could even go straight to the Hidden Sword Pavilion in the backyard of Hidden Sword Court, where they could have a good time with the 10 most famous golden girls of Hidden Sword Court. The corner of Wu Qi's mouth twitched as he watched. This servant is really amazing. Lao Ai laughed out loud, then looked at the servant and said, "What's your name? From now on, you will be my only direct disciple." In front of thousands of guests and girls, this burly man took off his lower clothes in a valiant and high-spirited manner, then used his internal energy to activate his lower body. After that, he picked up the 3-feet wooden wheel and put it on his lower body. Then, he gave it a hard push, and the wheel began to spin slowly. A large handful of rubies and sapphires sprinkled down onto the ground, attracting even more strange gazes from all directions. Wu Qi was laughing and giggling, putting on the face of a qualified profligate young master. He was hugging the serving ladies next to him, grabbing and groping them, while his pair of shifty eyes were glancing around. The guests who could lift a silver wheel and a golden wheel could not only receive all the benefits mentioned before, but also an additional great benefit provided by the esteemed guest. The servant was so frightened that he took a few steps back. He stared fixedly at Lady Qingyang's towering breasts, then said with a trembling voice, I want to try. With an indescribable madness in his eyes, the servant clenched his teeth and said, I want to try. If I succeed, the esteemed guest will also give me some benefits, right? The atmosphere in the courtyard had reached its peak. When a handsome, pale-faced scholar successfully lifted the wheel and spun it quickly, everyone present applauded and cheered excitedly. Even Wu Qi laughed and scolded, "What an animal. This guy looks like a pretty boy, but I can't believe he's actually a donkey." Those people stared at Wu Qi for a while, and found that he was a complete prodigal. So, they did not take it seriously and moved to another direction. Only in the 3 private rooms on the 6th floor, a few scrutinizing eyes stared at Wu Qi for a while, and only then did they slowly move away. Wu Qi nodded his head inwardly. This was a good technique, as it would not offend any of the guests. Instead, it would make all the guests feel that they were valued. The difficulty of this technique was no less than some of the devil techniques, such as the eyes of ecstasy. Amidst the loud cheers and laughter of all the guests and ladies, a tall and burly servant dressed in the uniform of a servant, but with an ugly face, carefully walked up to the platform. A dead silence fell upon the surroundings. Standing on the platform, Lady Qingyang stared at the servant and scolded sternly, "You're a madman who's courting death. Who allowed you to come up here?" "Madman Shui." Wu Qi gave the servant a thoughtful look, then raised his head and looked at Lao Ai. A guest who could be addressed as an esteemed guest by the master of Hidden Sword Pavilion must be a real noble. An additional benefit provided by him? What was it? A direct bestowment of nobility or some other benefits? Everything was possible, everything was possible. As an esteemed guest of the great prince, how could the benefits he promised be any small matter? After that, several dozens of guests who thought they had extraordinary talents came up to the platform one after another. As a result, some of them succeeded in lifting the wooden wheel, while some failed. Those who managed to lift the wheel were applauded and cheered by everyone around them, while those who failed were laughed at by countless people. One after another, they covered their faces and rushed out of Hidden Sword Pavilion. Chapter 309. Quietly, a wisp of innate gunmetal energy began to form on his fingertip. As Wu Qi was about to strike, he suddenly heard some noises coming from outside Hidden Sword Pavilion. After a brief moment of pondering, he quietly stopped. Lao Ai looked at Madman Shui with a big smile on his face, clapped his hands and said, "What a good name. Madman Shui. Hee, interesting." Then, he casually made a grabbing gesture and brought Madman Shui up into the air, landing right next to Lao Ai. Lao Ai reached out his big hand and touched Madman Shui's body for a while, then nodded and said, "Not bad, not bad. Not only do you have an extraordinary innate talent, your aptitude in cultivation is excellent as well. Now that you have acknowledged me as your master, you will have a bright future ahead of you, and you will be blessed with endless love affairs." Laughing wildly, Lao Ai dragged Madman Shui into the private room to teach him a lesson. Su Meier stood on the veranda with a smile on her face, throwing flirtatious glances at all directions. A boundless seductive force overflowed from her like a pool of hot spring. Suddenly, countless guests covered their bellies with their hands, their faces blushing as they pulled the beautiful girls beside them and rushed into the private room. These private rooms in Hidden Sword Pavilion had a living room at the front, and a luxuriously furnished large bed and couch at the back. With just one flirtatious glance from Su Meier, Hidden Sword Pavilion immediately turned into a battlefield of blood and flesh. Sounds of slapping and slapping filled the air. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled faintly, then pulled the maidservant beside him into the private room as well. The maidservant blushed, thinking that Wu Qi was going to pull her to do the same thing. But little did she expect that Wu Qi only pulled her back to the table, where they continued to eat and drink, and did not pull her to the large bed at the back. The maidservant turned her eyes to look at Wu Qi. She felt lucky and disappointed at the same time. She felt lucky because she could still keep her virginity for a few more days, but disappointed because she thought, why didn't this young, handsome, and wealthy young man like me fancy me? Another burst of melodious music came from the patio. A large group of dancers with revealing clothes danced wildly to the music on the high platform, pushing the extravagant and romantic atmosphere in Hidden Sword Pavilion to the limit. Right at this moment, a series of footsteps came from the stairs. An old man with a slightly plump body and a pale face walked slowly up to the 6th floor, surrounded by a few guards. Wherever this old man passed, the guards of the three princes would stop what they were doing, bowing their heads and bowing at him. Wu Qi unleashed his divine will and heard the whispers in the private rooms. The old man was the eldest prince of Gu Tai dynasty. When the old emperor was young, he was a playboy, and he was the eldest prince of a palace maid. On the other hand, the middle-aged man standing next to the prince was like a piece of bright jade, stealing all the light from the prince. He was thin, pale, with a handlebar mustache and a pair of deep eyes. The feeling this man gave others was like that of a crab. His body was filled with endless power, and even his bones were growing out of his skin and flesh. Upon a closer look, this man still looked like a normal living man, but he gave others the illusion that his bones and muscles were growing out of his skin and flesh, and his body was filled with endless energy. His clothes were as white as snow, and there was a sword hanging from his waist. The scabbard was pitch black and long, and he looked like a stiff venomous snake, ready to strike at any moment. From the corner of his eyes, Wu Qi glanced at the man. He was Tian Dan of Great Qi. Surprisingly, the military minister of Great Qi, Tian Dan, was following right beside the prince. Wu Qi sighed inwardly. The 4 princes here represented the power of 4 out of the 6 dynasties. Were those immortals and disciples of the 2 great immortal sects too easy to talk to? According to Wu Qi's opinion, these people should be locked up in Myriad Immortals' planet, forbidding them from coming out and harming the people. But, why did the 2 great immortal sects allow them to leave Myriad Immortals' planet and roam freely? Even if they were from a prestigious and righteous sect, they should at least have some precaution, right? For the sake of their own safety, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties would never reveal the existence of Myriad Immortals' planet to anyone. Even so, as long as they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, not to mention a white cloud planet, even a few planets occupied by immortal sects would be thrown into chaos by these fellows. Each and every one of these people were dragons and phoenixes among men, heroes and mighty warriors. In other words, if they were to become terrorists, they would definitely be the top terrorists. While frowning, Wu Qi shook his head inwardly. If he did not intervene in this matter, the Gu Tai dynasty would be completely finished. Not to mention who was standing behind the other 4 kings, just the power behind these 4 kings was more than enough to make the people of Gu Tai dynasty live in misery, and leave no trace of human habitation within 10,000 miles. These fellows could not believe that they were directly interfering with the change of dynasty of a mortal dynasty on a planet ruled by White Cloud Immortal sect. Sure enough, they were a group of people who were unwilling to be left out. Eldest King walked slowly up to the 6th floor, entered a private room, and sat down. The other 3 kings went to the same private room and greeted Eldest King. After exchanging some pleasantries with each other, the other 3 kings returned to their own private rooms. They did not even exchange glances with each other, and the atmosphere in the room was extremely stiff and cold. The dancers on the platform left one after another, and Qing Yang once again walked up to the platform, swaying her slender waist. With a smile on her face, she bowed 1 mile to the surrounding guests and said, "Dear guests, today is a good day. Every month, we, the Hidden Sword Pavilion, will bid for the first night of a young courtesan. But today, dear guests, you are really lucky. Today, we are not bidding for the first night of a young courtesan, but Miss Zi Qianyan, the only daughter of Gu Tai dynasty's former heavenly minister of rights, Elder Zi. Zi Qianyan." Wu Qi praised in a low voice, "What a good name." On the platform, Qing Yang laughed out loud and said, "Miss Zi comes from a noble background, and Zi clan is also one of the influential clans of Gu Tai dynasty. Besides that, Miss Zi is an expert in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. What is even rarer is that Miss Zi is an expert in the art of war, and she is the most outstanding military strategist among the younger generation of Gu Tai dynasty." None of the surrounding guests made a sound, and all of them had their eyes fixed on Qing Yang. Within the coverage of Wu Qi's divine will, he found that the heartbeats of several thousand guests were increasing rapidly, and the blood flowing in their veins had increased by at least 30%. There were even some filthy conversations coming out from a few rooms on the 5th and 6th floor. In the room above Wu Qi's head, a few men with unknown backgrounds were laughing obscenely, talking about how they would join hands and bid for Zi Qianyan's first night, then take turns to enjoy her. This Zi Qianyan, what crime did her Zi clan commit to be sent here? Wu Qi gave the serving lady next to him a look, then casually tossed a deep water pearl the size of a toddler's fist over to her. The serving lady caught the pearl, glanced around cautiously, lowered her voice and said, "Treason." Her entire clan was executed, and Zi Qianyan was sold into an official brothel, then sent to Hidden Sword Pavilion. Treason. Wu Qi raised his brows. It was indeed a classic crime. It was still possible for a high-ranking official from the Ministry of War to commit treason, but the Heavenly Minister of Rights was a noble official who was in charge of the imperial court's etiquette. How could he commit treason? Was he going to overthrow the Gu Tai dynasty with a group of scholars and a kitchen knife? Twitching his lips and shaking his head, Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh and said, "Another unlucky fellow. Which prince is it that accused Z clan of treason?" The question asked by Wu Qi was very straightforward, and he did not try to hide it at all. The serving ladies in the room had their faces turned pale, and none of them dared to say a word. They bowed their heads, not daring to look at Wu Qi. Shaking his head, Wu Qi decided not to force these serving ladies, who were also pitiful people. Stroking his chin, he murmured under his breath, "Look, if she is really a stunning beauty, and is truly talented, I might as well kidnap her and let those bachelors around me take advantage of her." Counting with his fingers, he realized that Lu Qingfeng did not have a girlfriend yet, and Meng Xiaobai and the others were also bachelors. There were too many bachelors around Wu Qi, so it was only right for Wu Qi to bring back a few stunning beauties and help his brothers solve their marriage problems. Thinking of this, Wu Qi could not help but grin foolishly. After saving Zi Qianyan, regardless of whether she was willing or not, he would marry her to Lu Qingfeng, and regardless of whether Lu Qingfeng was willing or not. After that, Great Yan dynasty would have a legitimate reason to meddle in the affairs of Gu Tai dynasty, to avenge Zi Qianyan and her entire family. It was a good excuse. As a daughter and son-in-law seeking revenge for her father and father-in-law, Patriarch Jiang Yun could not find any fault with it. While he was thinking about his plan, he suddenly heard the beating of drums and music from below. A dozen tall and burly shrews were pushing and shoving each other, grabbing a skinny and tall girl, who had a gentle and elegant appearance, and had a spirited style of riding, and walking up the dais. The girl's expression was still calm, and her eyes were as clear as water. Facing the naked malicious gazes that fell on her from all directions, she didn't have any reaction. She just stood coldly on the high platform. Clad in a pale green long dress, Zi Qianyan stood on the dais, as if she was the only person on the entire dais. Qing Yang and all the other shrews were overshadowed by her temperament, like a ball of sheep dung standing next to a bright pearl or a beautiful jade, and could not attract any attention from others. Suddenly, Qing Yang's voice became much lower. She gave Zi Qianyan a resentful look and said in a low voice, "Everyone, please feel free to bid for her. As long as the price is high enough, young Miss Z will be his tonight. If there is a wealthy guest who has taken a fancy to young Miss Z and wants to take her as his wife, we can still negotiate. But, the price will be extraordinarily high." In the private room where the 8 princes stayed, Xiang Yu's voice, which was as calm as ice yet mixed with an inexplicable fanaticism, was heard coming out. "It is truly a waste of a heavenly gift for such a stunningly beautiful woman to end up here. I want her entire body. Now, name your price. How much is Zi Qianyan's entire body worth?" Standing on the dais, Zi Qianyan held her head high, but 2 drops of tears were slowly sliding down her delicate and pretty cheeks. She was a proud and arrogant beauty, but now, she was reduced to being sold like a commodity. What else could she do other than cry? Wu Qi cleared his throat and thought, "It is you, Xiang Yu, who asked me to name my price." Slapping the table forcefully, Wu Qi cried out, "A mountain of gold. I want this young lady." Wu Qi changed the tone of his voice, making it sharp and shrill, like the unique tone of a eunuch. When his voice rang out, it immediately stirred up all the people in Hidden Sword Pavilion. A mountain of gold. There were less than 10 people in Hidden Sword Pavilion who dared to name such a price, including Xiang Yu and Lao Ai, who were not from the 6 dynasties of Gu Tai dynasty. Using a mountain of gold to buy a young lady, even if she was the beloved daughter of the former heavenly official of the Ministry of Rights, was just too much of a waste. Right after Wu Qi's voice faded, a shrill whistle of swords suddenly rang out. Miserable howls could be heard, as a dozen green-clothed pimps from Hidden Sword Pavilion rolled into the hall, their bodies covered in blood. They howled and screamed, rolling and struggling on the ground. Some of them had just rolled a few times, and their legs were already broken. A young man in white clothes, who looked to be in his early 30s, held a snowflake-like longsword in his hand as he strode into Hidden Sword Pavilion. He strode into the atrium, then strode up to the dais. He shouted sternly, "Don't be afraid, Feng is here. Whoever dares to stop me today, don't blame me for being merciless with my sword." A few thugs from Hidden Sword Pavilion went up to greet him. Li Feng gave a wild laugh and swung his long sword. A sword beam swept across like a waterfall, and a few thugs howled miserably as they were cut in half at the waist by Li Feng. Their internal organs and intestines spilled all over the ground. When the sword was unleashed, the entire hall was shaken. How dare this Li Feng cause trouble in a brothel owned by their lord? Most importantly, there were 4 princes from Gu Tai dynasty here today. On the dais, Zi Qianyan's body trembled. Suddenly, she snapped sternly, "Li Feng, are you crazy or stupid? Get out of here." Without saying a word, Li Feng strode up to the dais, stepping on the blood and internal organs on the ground. Chapter 310. Zi Qianyan. With a sharp sword in his hand, the man rushed up to the platform, kicked Lady Qingyang away, then chopped off the heads of a few ferocious women. Then, he wrapped his arms around Zi Qianyan's waist. Looking at the pale-faced Zi Qianyan, he cried out sternly, "I've told you, if we are going to die, we will die together." Zi Qianyan's body swayed. Suddenly, she laughed coldly and said, "Li Feng, you idiot. It's easy for you to die, but what about your family?" Covered in blood, Li Feng was struck dumb. His eyes went blank, then he shook his head crazily like a mad lion and howled, "I don't care anymore. If you die, I'll die with you. If they want to hurt you, they will have to step over my body." Xiang Yu and the others walked out from the 4 rooms on the 6th floor, occupying the balconies in all 4 directions of the veranda. The 2 great Zhao demon cultivators standing next to the 3 kings looked at the pair of infatuated men and women with indifferent expressions, showing no reaction. The aesthetic standards of demon cultivators were always different from those of human cultivators. Apart from a few supreme-grade demon cultivators, most demon cultivators had no interest in women. Meanwhile, Xiang Yu, Lao Ai, and Tian Dan glared at each other with bright eyes. Then, Lao Ai laughed hideously and said, "Step over your body." "Hee, that is not difficult at all. Madman Shui, kill that guy for me. That Zi Qianyan will be the first cultivation vessel I'll let you train. Come, kill this pretty boy for me." Suddenly, a pinkish mist rose from Lao Ai's body, as his right hand struck forcefully on Madman Shui's back. A strong pinkish energy rushed into Madman Shui's body, breaking all his meridians and acupoints in an instant. Amidst a series of rumbling noises coming from his meridians and acupoints, Madman Shui's body suddenly swelled up. With Lao Ai's mighty magical power, he had transformed from an ordinary young man who did not know any internal energy cultivation base into a peak-stage Hotian warrior, who was only 1 step away from stepping into Xiantian realm. Lao Ai grabbed Madman Shui and threw him down, then snapped, "Go, kill that pretty boy. You can do whatever you want with this girl." Madman Shui felt his body was filled with an endless power. A scorching hot air was flowing around him, and a faint pinkish aura was exuding from his pores. Like a fiend god who had just descended to the mortal world, Madman Shui let out a strange cry and leaped down from the balcony of the 6th floor. As the energy Lao Ai injected into Madman Shui's body came from the Great Sun magic, Madman Shui's penis protruded from his lower body, tearing a large hole in his tight green trousers. Little brat. You're dead." Madman Shui's body trembled violently as he stared fixedly at Zi Qianyan's beautiful and ethereal face. He landed heavily on the platform, thrusting his fist towards Li Feng's face. A whistling sound rang out as Madman Shui thrust his fist forward. Suddenly, a stream of pale pinkish flame burst out from his fist, shooting across like a shooting star. Li Yifeng raised his sword and parried the attack. But a loud clang rang out as the sword was shattered by Madman Shue's fist, which smashed viciously onto Li Yifeng's chest. The sound of bones breaking rang out, as at least a dozen of Li Yifeng's ribs were broken. Li Yifeng opened his mouth and coughed out a mouthful of blood onto Zi Qianyan's body, sending him flying far away while letting out a painful cry. Lao Ai laughed hideously and said, "I thought you are some mighty man, but it turns out you are just a soft little pretty boy." Tian Dan smiled faintly and said in a low voice, "This girl is very beautiful. Prince of Changxin, why don't you give her to me?" Lao Ai gave Tian Dan a sidelong glance, laughed strangely, and said, "There are not many beautiful girls under the heaven, and a talented girl who is also a beautiful girl is even rarer. This girl is the cultivation vessel I've chosen for my disciple. If my lord wants this girl, what can you give me in exchange?" Tian Dan lightly tapped the railing in front of him with his finger and said coolly, "Lao Ai, do you really think you are something? Do you really want to snatch this girl from me? Why don't you take a good look at yourself first? You are just a fake eunuch, and yet you dare to compete with me?" Tian Dan said a few words in a low voice. As a member of the imperial clan, he displayed his indescribable nobility and reserve, belittling Lao Ai to the point that he was worthless. Lao Ai's face fell, and his eyes turned bloodshot as he stared fixedly at Tian Dan like a bull in heat. Suddenly, the two demon cultivators from Great Zhao laughed strangely and said, "Lao Ai, Tian Dan, why don't you have a fair fight? We will be the witnesses, and it will be the fairest." While the crowd was in a great uproar, Madman Shui had already stretched his arm impatiently towards Zi Qianyan. His ugly face twisted as he laughed aloud in a nearly crazy manner. "You are the woman promised to me by my master, the only daughter of the heavenly official of the Ministry of Rites. The only daughter of the heavenly official of the Ministry of Rites, such a good woman. I've been doing hard labor in Hidden Sword Court for more than 10 years, but I've never seen such a respectable woman. I'm going to fuck you." Madman Shui grabbed Zi Qianyan's waist, then impatiently put his arms around her, whose face had turned blue. But this girl was indeed an extraordinary woman. Even though she was being kissed and groped by Madman Shui, she still had a calm expression, and did not show any signs of panic. Wu Qi walked out from the veranda, quietly looking at Li Yifeng, who was coughing blood and falling to the ground on the platform, and Zi Qianyan, who was forcibly held in Madman Shui's arms. Casually, he threw a large gemstone to a guard of Prince Mansion standing next to him. Wu Qi gave the guard a stern look, then asked with a cold voice, "What is the background of this Li Yifeng?" The ruby thrown out by Wu Qi was about the size of a baby's fist. It was a flawless gemstone crafted by an expert craftsman hired by Star Picking Pavilion, and could be sold at a sky-high price of over 100,000 gold coins in Ji City. In Tai City, a natural gemstone like this was a rare treasure that was rarely seen in the entire world. The guard held the gemstone in his hand, his eyes staring blankly. On top of that, Wu Qi had used a thread of soul-shocking magical power from the mystic eyes of universe in his gaze. With a blank expression, the guard answered, "Li Yifeng is the son of General Wei Feng, Marquis Yu Shi. His mother is the youngest princess, Her Highness Jin Xian." His eyes suddenly lit up, as Wu Qi nodded his head and said, "So, he also has the bloodline of the imperial clan? His father is a general who holds the military power. Wonderful. A pair of pitiful people, wonderful. Listen to me, and I'll fulfill the wish of a husband and wife, and give you a crown to wear." On the balcony on the 6th floor, Xiang Yu laughed out loud and said, "Lao Ai, Tian Dan, don't fight for her. I've told you, I've taken a fancy to this girl. I don't want her, but a girl who is proficient in all 6 arts and the art of war is just right to be betrothed to one of my sons. Xiang Zhuang, make your move. If you can get her, she will be your concubine. What bullshit rules of the auction? I don't care. A mountain of gold. Now, I won't even bid a single coin." Xiang Yu's eyes shone brightly with a blood-red devilish gleam, as he glared fiercely at Dai Wang. A blood-red gleam flashed, and Dai Wang felt as if he was struck by a thunderbolt. He grunted and took a few steps back, blood trickling down from the corner of his mouth. Tian Dan was furious. He pointed his finger at Xiang Yu and bellowed, "Chu man, how dare you be so rude?" Lao Ai was eager to see the world plunged into chaos. He laughed out loud and said, "Hegemon King of Western Chu, we are now allies. Why don't we join hands and kill Tian Dan? You can take the gold, silver, and jewels from his clan, and I'll take the beautiful girls from his clan. Isn't that great?" Xiang Yu gave a wild laugh and cried out, "Wonderful! Prince of Changxin's words are exactly what I want. Ask that disciple of yours, who is worse than a pig or a dog, to come back here. That girl belongs to Xiang Zhuang." A blood-red gleam shot out from all over his body. Just a moment ago, Xiang Yu was going to abide by the rules and participate in the auction, but now, he had the face of a bandit, thinking of seizing Zi Qianyan by force. Obviously, his devilish nature had flared up. Lao Ai was taken aback. Before he could call out to Madman Shui, Xiang Zhuang had already drawn out his sword and leaped down from the balcony. He thrust the sword towards Madman Shui while roaring, "You filthy bastard! You are worse than a pig or a dog. Do you really think you can touch my girl?" A blood-red beam that stretched over 100 feet long shot out from the tip of the sword. Like a long rainbow, it thrust straight towards Madman Shui's neck. With Xiang Zhuang's cultivation base of early-stage nascent divinity realm, there was no way Madman Shui could escape from his hands. The blood-red beam was bone-piercingly cold, filled with a heavy killing intent that weighed down like a lofty mountain. It immediately made Madman Shui feel suffocated, unable to make a sound, and unable to move. He stood stiffly on the balcony, staring at the blood-red beam that came slashing down from above in despair. It was not easy for Lao Ai to take in a disciple that he was proud of, and both of them had extraordinary innate talents. How could he bear to let this disciple be killed by Xiang Zhuang? He roared furiously, "Xiang Yu, how dare you hurt even a single hair of my disciple?" A large sheet of pinkish mist sprayed out from the top of Lao Ai's head, transforming into a slender hand that grabbed towards Xiang Zhuang. Suddenly, a thunderbolt came whistling over from the side, shattering Lao Ai's huge hand into pieces. Furiously, Lao Ai spun around, but it was Tian Dan who blocked him. Su Meier gave a cold snort. She flicked her sleeve, shooting out a white beam that pierced through the air with a jarring noise, trying to pull Madman Shui and Zi Qianyan back to her side. But, a large sheet of blood-red beam shot up into the sky from the top of Xiang Yu's head, while the banner of Qi Yu swooped down along with a strong gust of wind, shattering the white beam transformed from Su Meier's sleeve into pieces. The entire courtyard was blanketed by the blood-red beam, and Xiang Zhuang's aura suddenly grew at least 10 times stronger. Like a dragon, he thrust his sword straight towards Madman Shui. On the balcony, Li Yifeng, who was knocked flying away by Madman Shui's punch, actually struggled to his feet. He pressed his left hand on the fracture on his chest, clenched his jaws tightly, and pulled out a short dagger inlaid with gold and jade from under his sleeve, throwing it forcefully towards Xiang Zhuang. It was true that Madman Shui wanted to snatch Zi Qianyan, but so did Xiang Zhuang. Li Yifeng coughed out a mouthful of blood and cried out, "Kill! Die! Let's die together! Zi Qianyan, even if we are going to die, I'll die before you." Wu Qi threw the wine pot forcefully onto the ground, then flicked his left wrist, shooting out several dozens of dragon-scaled golden beams that weighed 50,000 kilograms and were wrapped in innate earth element energies, shooting out and smashing viciously onto Xiang Zhuang's body. Xiang Zhuang did not notice that someone was trying to sneak attack him. Every single golden beam smashed onto his body, ripping open his skin and ripping his flesh. Nearly all the golden beams pierced through his body, bringing up a large amount of blood and minced meat. Xiang Zhuang cried out in pain. Severely wounded, he fell heavily to the ground, struggling for a long while without being able to get up. The blood-red beam unleashed by the banner of Qi Yu quickly converged towards him. Nourished by it, Xiang Zhuang's body recovered at an incredible speed, but he still could not move for some time. Activating the acquired magnetic sword beam, Wu Qi transformed into a dark beam and shot up to the balcony. He grabbed Zi Qianyan and Li Yifeng, then twisted his body and transformed into a stream of yellow mist that plunged into the ground. Xiang Yu, Lao Ai, and the others were busy fighting each other with their divine abilities, so how could they have the time to stop Wu Qi? Nevertheless, the two demon cultivators from Great Zhao could see Wu Qi's movement clearly, but when they looked at Xiang Yu and his men who were fighting each other, they did not have the mood to stop Wu Qi. Seeing that Wu Qi had successfully plunged into the ground, Xiang Yu, Lao Ai, Su Meier, and Tian Dan looked at each other and did not say a word. Xiang Yu roared furiously. Suddenly, the banner of Qiyu behind his back transformed into a river of blood and rushed out, plunging into the ground and chasing after Wu Qi. Chapter 311. The moon was bright, and the stars were sparse. Tall grasses were drifting about amidst the barren mountain, and the place was desolate and deserted. The innate earth element escape art was extremely mysterious, as it did not leave any trace behind. After chasing Wu Qi for tens of miles, the banner of Qiyu lost track of his aura. It could only transform into a sea of blood and flee wildly under the ground, and could no longer pursue him. Carrying Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan, Wu Qi squeezed out from the ground and casually threw them to the ground. Zi Qianyan was in a better condition, as she was only thrown to the ground, but Li Yifeng gave a muffled snort, as his internal organs were bruised by the broken bones. He opened his mouth and coughed out another mouthful of blood. Zi Qianyan let out a soft cry as she struggled and threw herself next to Li Yifeng. Using her sleeve, she carefully wiped off the bloodstains on Li Yifeng's face, then asked with a soft voice, "Yifeng, are you all right?" Li Yifeng raised his eyes and gave Wu Qi a look. Zi Qianyan rose to her feet hastily, dropped to her knees and kowtowed to Wu Qi while thanking him. "Zi Qianyan, thank Master Immortal for your great kindness. Dare I ask Master Immortal to use your magic to save Yifeng? I can't repay your kindness in this life, but in my next life." Wu Qi quickly interrupted Zi Qianyan, Don't talk about being an animal or a slave in your next life. I don't lack slaves, and I don't lack mounts. What I need now is a few people to help me. Saving people is very simple." Taking out a healing spirit pill concocted by White Cloud Immortal Sect, Wu Qi secretly injected a tiny thread of innate wood element energy into it, then gave it to Zi Qianyan. After giving Wu Qi a deep bow and thanking him, Zi Qianyan took the spirit pill and carefully fed it to Li Yifeng. The spirit pill was a powerful healing medicine concocted by White Cloud Immortal Sect, and its effect was very strong. Added with the thread of innate wood element energy injected by Wu Qi, which contained a very strong innate life force, the spirit pill immediately turned into a clear stream and flowed around Li Yifeng's abdomen. A faint fragrance wafted out from his body, and a clump of green mist that could be seen with naked eyes wrapped around his body. His collapsed chest gradually restored to its original state. His cracked bones and muscles automatically regenerated. Li Yifeng's wounds itched and he couldn't help but groan several times. In a short quarter of an hour, Li Yifeng had become as lively as a dragon and as lively as a tiger. He was even more spirited than when he had broken into Hidden Sword Pavilion. He also hurriedly knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Wu Qi. Junior Li Yifeng kowtows to thank Immortal Master for his great kindness. If not for Immortal Master's mercy, I'm afraid. Speaking of the emotional part, Li Yifeng could no longer restrain himself and began to sob. He raised his head and looked at Zi Qianyan. His face was mottled with tears, which made him look very unsightly. Zi Qianyan dropped to her knees as well, kowtowing along with Li Yifeng. Seeing how emotional Li Yifeng was, Zi Qianyan, who had been extremely calm all this while, could not help but have her eyes turn red. However, her self-control was clearly 100 times better than Li Yifeng's. She didn't shed a single tear, only constantly kowtowing to Wu Qi. What a pair of infatuated man and resentful woman. The girl was as strong as a man, but the man was as passionate as a woman. Wu Qi rolled his eyes helplessly. Zi Qianyan was indeed a wonderful girl. But it was a pity that his original plan of bringing Zi Qianyan back to Myriad Immortals planet and giving her to Lu Qingfeng or a few of his brothers was now gone. It was obvious that this pair was in love with each other. Since they already had that kind of intention, why should he interfere? Clearing his throat, Wu Qi flicked his sleeve, sending out an invisible but gentle force to help both of them up. When he sent his divine will into both Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan, Wu Qi was surprised to find out that both of them actually possessed an extraordinary talent in cultivation. Although they did not have the foundation of geniuses like those carefully selected inner sect disciples in White Cloud Immortal Sect, with sufficient energy stones and spirit herbs, they still had a chance of breaking through the nascent divinity realm. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi nodded and said with a smile, "Li Yifeng, don't talk. How can you call yourself a man if you keep crying? Zi Qianyan, I think you will be the one in charge of your family in the future. If I have something to ask, I'll just ask you." Li Yifeng's face blushed because of Wu Qi's words. He bowed his head and quickly wiped away his tears, not daring to say a word. On the other side, Zi Qianyan bowed deeply to Wu Qi and said softly, "Master Immortal, just ask me. As long as I know something, I'll definitely tell you everything I know." Wu Qi nodded and said coldly, "What is the cause and effect of your entire clan being killed?" Zi Qianyan answered straightforwardly, "My father did not know how to cater to both sides, and refused to listen to my advice. He offended 8 princes at the same time, and was accused of treason. Half a month ago, his entire clan was executed. Because I am rather beautiful, many princes and ministers coveted me, so I was sent to an official brothel. Later on, His Highness used his authority to send me to Hidden Sword Pavilion." Nodding slowly, Wu Qi asked, "Aren't you sad?" Zi Qianyan dropped to her knees once again, kowtowing to Wu Qi and saying, "As a woman, how can I not be sad when my entire clan is killed? But what's the use of being sad? If I don't die, I can just focus on my revenge, but I won't have the energy and time to be sad." "Excellent." Wu Qi clapped his hands and said with a smile, "What a wonderful woman." Reaching out to help Zi Qianyan up, Wu Qi pointed at Li Yifeng and said with a smile, "As for you. Why should I ask you? Do I even need to ask about your petty business? What an overconfident young master. For the sake of a woman, you risked your life and ventured into a dragon's lair and a tiger's lair. You thought you could shock the heaven and earth and make the gods weep and move the heaven to save you, but you should take a good look at your own strength and identity." Li Yifeng rolled his eyes and stared at Wu Qi as he said, "Immortal Master saved Yifeng. Isn't it because the heaven was moved and sent Immortal Master to save Yifeng and Qianyan from the fire and water?" Li Yifeng dropped to his knees before Wu Qi, kowtowing with utmost sincerity as he said, "This is because the heaven has a spirit and does not want Qianyan to suffer such humiliation." Wu Qi was speechless. He really had nothing to say to this stubborn boy. Shaking his head, Wu Qi moved his fingers and released Gold Horn and Silver Horn. The 2 brothers' bellies were so full that they looked like 2 round balls. A few pale bones were hanging from the corners of their mouths, and they were snoring with their heads leaning against each other. After being thrown out from the spirit breeding ring by Wu Qi, the 2 brothers yawned lazily. With a harmless and lazy smile on their faces, they nodded at Wu Qi and fell into a deep sleep again. Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan were struck dumb. They stared blankly at the 2 great pythons, one gold and one silver. They had dragon horns on their heads and a pair of claws under their bellies. They were obviously the legendary flood dragons. However, these 2 flood dragons looked more like 2 rubber balls. They were not as vigorous, agile, magical, and powerful as the legendary flood dragons. Looking at Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan's dumbfounded expression, Wu Qi frowned and sprung to his feet, then gave each of the 2 brothers a hard kick. Gold Horn and Silver Horn howled and leaped to their feet, twisting and crawling for a while on the ground. Their bellies were wriggling, as the excellent meat was quickly digested, and soon, their bellies were deflated. The brothers spat out the bones in their mouths, coiled up their bodies, held their heads high, and called out to Wu Qi with a serious expression, "Master, elder brother, why did you summon us?" Speechless, Wu Qi stared at the two lazy flood dragons, who had been fattened up in the spirit breeding ring for 3 years, and said coldly, "I'll give you a good job. From today onwards, you will be Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan's bodyguards. Before I make Li Yifeng the emperor of Gu Tai dynasty." Li Yifeng let out a miserable howl. He stared blankly at Wu Qi and cried out, "What? Me? The emperor of Gu Tai dynasty? How is that possible? Although my mother is the biological daughter of His Majesty, but..." Zi Qianyan's eyes lit up, and she said in a low voice, "If Master Immortal is willing to lend us a hand, Uncle Li has an army of several 100,000 soldiers. If we seize the opportunity when the 8 kings are fighting and killing each other, we might have a chance to succeed." At the end of her words, Zi Qianyan's face grew colder and colder, turning as cold as a 10,000-year-old Xian Bing. Obviously, she had already thought that once Li Yifeng really ascended to the throne and became the emperor, some people would be in big trouble. Wu Qi glared at Li Yifeng, thinking that this guy was indeed a good-for-nothing, as he was not as calm and reliable as Zi Qianyan. With an indifferent voice, he said, "Then it's decided. Both of you, get down on your knees and kowtow to me. I'll take you as my disciples, and from now on, you will be my first disciples. Since everyone in Gu Tai dynasty wants to have a piece of the pie, why can't I?" Without saying a word, Li Yifeng dropped to his knees, kowtowing and calling out, "Master," at the top of his voice. Meanwhile, Zi Qianyan looked at Wu Qi and asked, "May I know which sect Master Immortal is from?" "All the dynasties in White Cloud Planet are vassals of White Cloud Immortal sect." Zi Qianyan's words were tactful, but the meaning was very clear. If Wu Qi was an outsider cultivator who wanted to stir up trouble in White Cloud Planet, even if Zi Qianyan had a grudge against her family, she would never acknowledge him as her master. This was White Cloud Immortal sect's territory, and any outsider cultivator who wanted to do anything here would not end up well. Wu Qi gave Zi Qianyan a look, who looked calm and composed, then turned to look at Li Yifeng, who was kowtowing and kowtowing. He sighed helplessly, took out the Discipline Hall medallion that represented his identity and waved it in front of Zi Qianyan. He pointed at Zi Qianyan and said, "From today onwards, you are the eldest senior sister, and he is the second junior brother. If there is nothing important, don't let me see him. He is as stupid as a rock." When she saw Wu Qi's medallion, Zi Qianyan gave Li Yifeng a look, who stood there in a daze. Only then did she drop to her knees and kowtow a few times to Wu Qi, calling out respectfully, "Master." Wu Qi laughed delightfully. He looked at his 2 new disciples and nodded his head satisfyingly. He took out a storage ring and gave it to Zi Qianyan, then threw a shabby storage bag to Li Yifeng. He also took out a few upper-grade magical items and gave them to Zi Qianyan, and a shabby flying sword of lower-grade magical item level. He also took out a large number of spirit talismans crafted by Earth Immortals of excellent quality and gave them to Zi Qianyan. Then, he randomly took out a handful of explosive talismans crafted by Xiantian cultivators and gave them to Li Yifeng. No matter how stupid Li Yifeng was, he could easily tell the difference in the treatment given to him and Zi Qianyan by his newly appointed master. However, when he thought of the impression he left on Wu Qi today, he could only put on a green face and say nothing. Looking at the bunch of precious items in Zi Qianyan's hands, he nearly drooled. He loved using swords the most, and no matter how he looked at it, the upper-grade magical flying sword in Zi Qianyan's hand was at least 10 times stronger than the one in his hand. Wu Qi gave Li Yifeng a fierce glare. While he was about to teach both of them the mystic technique of White Cloud Immortal Sect, a loud thunderclap was suddenly heard coming from a distance. Wu Qi quickly turned his head and looked over. He saw a group of men clad in green clothes fleeing towards them at top speed from a distance of 30 miles away. Behind them, 2 nascent soul demon cultivators were unleashing bolts of demonic thunderbolts and smashing down violently. With the mystic eyes of universe, Wu Qi could see a distance of 1,000 miles, and he could see a mere 30 miles away very clearly as if he was looking at the lines on his palm. Among those green-clothed men, there was an unlucky fellow who was being carried on someone's back and kept coughing blood. Who else could it be but Yen Bugue? Gold horn, silver horn, go save them. Wu Qi cried out loudly. Hurry! Chapter 312. Yen Bugue looked at Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan. Yen Bugue lowered his voice and said in a low voice, "These 3 years, Brother Wu Qi, you have really enjoyed a good life. With a few old immortals taking care of you, you can live a carefree life. But, we can't. Because of what happened in Song Ao Immortal Abode, we offended a few old immortals, and in the end, all the emperors of 6 dynasties became outer sect disciples. Being an outer sect disciple always makes me feel uneasy." Wu Qi was taken aback, then he waved his hand at Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan. Zi Qianyan dragged Li Yifeng away. Li Yifeng was still in a daze, trying to stay where he was and listen to what was going on. But in the end, he was dragged several hundred feet away by Zi Qianyan, who pinched his ear and began to lecture him. Wu Qi nodded thoughtfully and said, "Patriarch Jiang Yun once said that when the time is right, the 6 dynasties can establish their own sects." Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other leaders of the 2 immortal sects only wanted to occupy myriad immortals' planet and develop their sects with peace of mind. As for the emperors and ministers of the 6 states, which one of them was willing to live under someone else? The 2 immortal sects were powerful, and the 6 nations were powerless against them. But that didn't stop the 6 nations from doing something else. Shaking his head, Wu Qi pressed his hand on Yen Bugue's blackened body and activated the hand of silk. A strong suction force came out of Yen Bugue's body and sucked all the poisonous gas into his palm. Wisps of black smoke kept gushing out from Yen Bugue's body, gradually condensing into a ball of black liquid the size of a duck egg in Wu Qi's palm. When all the venom had been sucked out by Wu Qi, Yen Bugue's body returned to its normal color. Wu Qi then shot out a flame from his palm, burning away all the venom, turning it into a pungent black gas that floated away. Wu Qi looked at Yen Bugue with a puzzled expression, frowned and said, "I thought it was strange. Jiangsheng Zi asked me to come to Gutai dynasty, to find out which of the 8 princes is suitable to be the new emperor, and asked me to appoint one to inherit the throne. As a result, as soon as he arrived in Tai City, he ran into a lot of old acquaintances. What are you doing here? Who are you going to assassinate? Why did you assassinate him? You haven't told me these things clearly." 2 demon cultivators with a cultivation base of mid-stage nascent soul realm were chasing after Yen Bugue and his company complacently. Initially, they were still having fun with them, attacking them with demon thunders from time to time, planning to exhaust Yen Bugue and his company to death before devouring their flesh and blood. All of a sudden, Gold Horn and Silver Horn rushed out. They immediately sensed the enormous medicinal power contained in the 2 pythons' bodies. The 2 demon cultivators no longer dared to play around. They hastily shot out 2 green sword lights toward Gold Horn and Silver Horn. The 2 demon cultivators were also cultivators of the Snake Demon clan. Their sword lights were refined from the venom they secreted themselves. Although the quality of their flying swords was very poor, the evil venom they contained was extremely powerful. If an ordinary nascent soul cultivator was wounded by a flying sword, the venom would attack his heart, and his fleshly body would immediately disintegrate. Even his nascent soul would be contaminated by the venom, causing it to collapse and die. Wu Qi threw the medicine bottle to Yen Bugue, then snorted coldly and found a rock to sit on. Crossing his legs, he said with a smile, "I'll give you some, but I can't give them for free. Ask Chief General to exchange them with energy stones. It's a life-saving, eradicating ointment. You can give me 1,000 upper-grade energy stones for a bottle of it. It's a very fair and reasonable price." They were 2 silver ring serpents, each with a body as thick as a water tank and a length of over 200 feet. They were already terrified by the indistinct aura of flood dragons emanating from Gold Horn and Silver Horn, and now that their greatest reliance was shattered by the cold air, it would be strange if they did not flee. Silverhorn threw his head back and breathed out a long sigh. Human flesh. I have been following this master for so long. Human flesh. Fragrant human flesh. Wu Qi lifted Yan Bugui up with one hand, then tore the shirt covering his upper body with his claw. The right side of his body had turned black, and his skin had begun to fester. Even the muscles beneath his skin were riddled with scabs that looked like honeycombs. The dying Yan Bugui raised his head up, gave Wu Qi a wicked smile and said, "What a disgrace I've brought to an alien planet. I brought my brothers to assassinate someone, but I didn't expect that Great Zhao's sinecures would be guarding that spot. More than half of my brothers were killed, and I nearly died as well." However, the cold air sprayed out by Silverhorn was actually a wisp of extreme yin energy that he brought with him innately. It was bone-piercing cold, and did not fear any evil venom at all. The two sword beams were strangled and killed by several dozens of cold air streams, instantly freezing into countless greenish powder that drifted in the air. The venom contained in the flying swords had long been cleansed by the cold air, leaving not even a trace behind. Two demon cultivators coughed out a large mouthful of blood, turning into their true forms and fleeing at top speed. When they arrived before Wu Qi, all the secret agents fell limply to the ground, unable to move anymore. Only the secret agent, who carried Yan Bugui on his back, staggered and fell before Wu Qi, wailing, "Duke of Wu Qi, our master is wounded by an evil man. Please treat him quickly." He pulled out a jar of spirit ointment which he had concocted himself over the past few years. While applying it on Yan Bugui's wound, he asked, "Assassinate someone? Since when did scouting officers become part-time assassins? Where is Great Zhao's sinecures? Why do you want to assassinate that person?" He snorted coldly. Suddenly, a thought flashed in Wu Qi's mind, and he asked with surprise, "How did you come out from that place?" He pondered for a brief moment, then breathed out a long sigh and said, "Send the order to all the men from the 6 dynasties. I want Gu Tai dynasty, and no one is allowed to snatch it from me. Otherwise, I'll inform Patriarch Jiang Yun, and all of you will lose everything. None of you will be able to take advantage of me." The brothers killed the demon cultivators, devoured their nascent souls, and devoured the bodies of the 2 enormous demon serpents. It took them less than the time of a few breaths. At this point in time, Yan Bugui and the others had not even gotten their revenge. Only when Goldhorn and Silverhorn began to snore did Yan Bugui and the group of over 30 secret agents of scouting officers finally arrive, panting and carrying Yan Bugui on their backs. "So?" Wu Qi nodded and asked. With a belly full of anger, the 2 serpents rolled up a strong gust of wind and rushed towards the group of men in green led by Yan Bugui. With a heavy swing of their golden horns and long tails, a few rocks around them were smashed into pieces. "Those in green, go that way. Our master is waiting for you," he cried out sternly. Only then did Wu Qi think of a deadly question: how did so many people from the 6 dynasties leave Myriad Immortals' planet? Did the people from the 2 great immortal sects just let them come and go as they pleased? The group of secret agents of scouting officers cried out in unison. A green light was seen rolling and rocking behind their backs, as the beast souls of the wind-breaking wolves were roaring furiously. Then, they sped up, using the last bit of their strength to flee in the direction where Wu Qi was. Zi Qianyan bowed slightly to Yan Bugui, while Li Yifeng gave Wu Qi a resentful look. It was one thing for his master to be biased, but how could he be so biased? So, he could only be a puppet emperor? That was too hurtful. Yan Bugui chuckled and said complacently, "Therefore, the 6 dynasties have come to a private discussion, and we will send our best men to leave that place. First, White Cloud Planet, and then some other planets. In short, we will use all the means we can think of, such as swindling, burning, killing, and looting. In short, we will open up new territories, and new industries." The brothers burped satisfyingly, then devoured the 2 serpents, skin, and bones. After that, they lazily twisted their bodies and swam all the way back to Wu Qi. Goldhorn and Silverhorn intimately wiped the blood from the corner of their mouths on Wuqi's thigh, then curled up next to him and began snoring comfortably. The ointment concocted by Wuqi was very strong, but Wuqi was too lazy to consider the combination of the ointment. He only wanted the strongest medicinal strength, and did not care whether the wounded man could bear it or not. When the pale green ointment was smeared on Yen Bugue's rotting skin, he felt as if countless steel blades were stabbing fiercely into his body, causing him to howl miserably in pain. The secret agents of scouting officers looked at each other, speechless. What kind of ointment could make their leader suffer so much pain? Was it a healing ointment or a deadly poison? I thought I could have a piece of human flesh, said Goldhorn gloomily. Once again, Wuqi was rendered speechless. Yen Bugue said excitedly, Brother Wuqi, you may not know this, but the emperors and princes of all the dynasties on White Cloud Planet are as stupid as pigs and dogs, and we can easily control them. Now, it is the people from the 6 dynasties who are fighting fiercely against each other, while the emperors and princes of these dynasties have become our puppets. When the ointment was smeared on his skin, Yen Bugue, who was in so much pain that tears came out from his eyes, suddenly felt that the burning pain had turned into a refreshing coolness. He could feel his skin healing rapidly, and his injuries were recovering at an incredible speed. He could not help but cry out, "This is so satisfying. This ointment is too wonderful for words. Brother Wuqi, can you give us some?" Goldhorn and Silverhorn let out a long cry of joy. Suddenly, red clouds and white mists rose from their bellies, lifting them up into the sky and charging toward Yen Bugue and the others. Hastily, Wuqi cried out, "Look carefully. The 2 demon cultivators at the back are the enemies. If you dare to touch even a piece of flesh of the green-clothed man in front of you, I'll chop you into pieces when we return." However, Goldhorn suddenly leaped forward and came before the 2 serpents like a bolt of lightning. Suddenly, a large ball with a diameter of about 10 feet bulged out near Goldhorn's throat. Then, he gave a loud roar and shot out a crimson flame dragon from his mouth, enveloping the 2 serpents in a towering flame. The poor serpent demons, who had cultivated their nascent souls with great difficulty and transformed into human form, had their skin and flesh torn, and even their bones were cooked by the high temperature. Suddenly, 2 green beams shot out from the serpent demons' bodies. They were the nascent souls of the 2 demon cultivators, who wanted to seize the opportunity to flee. But, how could Goldhorn and Silverhorn allow them to do so? The 2 great pythons opened their mouths and inhaled, forming 2 visible vortexes in the air. After that, the 2 serpent nascent souls were swallowed by Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Abruptly, the bodies of the brothers shone brightly, as if they had grown a little bigger. Goldhorn and Silverhorn gave a joyful cry, then rushed forward excitedly and began gnawing at the bodies of the 2 serpent demons. Yen Bugue nodded and said, "That's right. When the time comes, we'll establish our own sect." Recently, the few kingdoms on White Cloud Planet are going to be in a state of turmoil. Ugh, it has been a long time since we last had any activity, so we can use these dynasties on White Cloud Planet as a practice. Take the old emperor of Gu Tai dynasty for example. He should not have died so soon, but his energy essence was drained by Imperial Advisor Su with the ecstasy grand magic, and he was at his last gasp. Without saying a word, Silverhorn opened his mouth and sprayed out several dozens of streams of cold air, each measuring about 10 feet long, which blotted out the sky and greeted the 2 demon cultivators who were approaching. The cold air was so cold that a thick layer of ice quickly formed on the ground. Carried on the back of one of his subordinates, Yen Bugue shuddered violently, and was so cold that his teeth were chattering. Gasping for breath, he quickly pointed in the direction where Wuqi was and said, "This way. These are the 2 divine dragons serving under Duke of Tianyun. With Duke of Tianyun here, we have nothing to worry about." Wuqi did not say a word. Just as he expected, the time for these demons to dance in a frenzy had arrived. The saliva that kept dripping down from the corners of Goldhorn and Silverhorn's mouths stopped abruptly. Yen Bugue laughed, nodded, and said with a smile, "They are not bad looking. They are indeed the Emperor's and." "Ah." Yen Bugue suddenly came to his senses. He stared at Wu Qi and cried out, "You want to support them to be the emperors of Gutai dynasty? Then, why is Prince of Chengxin still bothering 6th prince?" After a brief pause, Wu Qi pointed at Zi Qianyan and Li Yifeng, smiled, and said, "These are my 2 new disciples. Take a look, do they look like the emperor and queen of Gutai dynasty? I think they are pretty good. I'm sure Qianyan has the demeanor of a motherly model of the world. Although this male disciple is a little stupid, he is very qualified to be a puppet emperor." Chapter 313. Chuckling, Yen Bugue habitually glanced to the left and right, then told Wu Qi the truth. It was true that White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimlas Sect had restricted the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties from entering and leaving Myriad Immortals planet. Over the past 3 years, only a few emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties were allowed to visit White Cloud planet and the planets occupied by Tranquil Vimlas Sect through the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation. One reason was to appreciate the local conditions and customs of the 2 great immortal sects, and treat it as a sightseeing tour. Another reason was that, as these emperors and ministers were the nominal disciples of the 2 great immortal sects, they had to show their faces at their headquarters, to see how the headquarters of their sects looked like, and to establish a good relationship with the many executing elders in their sections. However, White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimlas Sect should not have allowed Mod and Gigazi, the 2 old misters, to take a stroll through the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation. Over the past 3 years, the 2 old misters had entered and exited the formation 6 times. Relying on the enlightenment gained from these 6 times, combined with the magical properties of short-distance teleportation formations, the 2 old misters managed to construct a grand universal teleportation formation that belonged to the 6 dynasties 1 month ago. As if they had found a priceless treasure, the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties immediately gathered a great amount of materials and constructed dozens of large-scale teleportation formations in dozens of top-secret places on Myriad Immortals planet. Each teleportation formation was heavily guarded by the 6 dynasties, to prevent the secret from leaking out. Mod and Gigazi, on the other hand, had not only constructed the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation, but also found several dozens of different coordinates that led to other planets from the teleportation formations of the 2 great immortal sections. In other words, the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties could now freely enter and leave Myriad Immortals planet, and they could not only go to the planets controlled by the 2 great immortal sections. According to Yen Bugue, all the people of the 6 dynasties who knew about this had sworn a vicious oath that they would never reveal the existence of Myriad Immortals planet. After all, it was closely related to their own interests, and none of them would be stupid enough to expose a priceless planet to more people. Unless it was an outsider like Wu Qi, who was forced into a desperate situation and saw that he was about to be suppressed by the joint forces of the enemies, and his life was threatened, who among the influential nobles born and bred in the 6 dynasties would sell a priceless planet to someone else? So, Wu Qi stared blankly at Yen Bugue. Yen Bugue blinked his eyes and looked at Wu Qi. Now, the elite troops of various countries have secretly gone to various planets and are doing exactly what we did on White Cloud planet. In short, he would first control a few puppets and then fight for territory in the mortal world for his country. Once we control enough mortal countries, we will infiltrate the immortal sects that control the various planets. Once the people we control have enough power in those immortal sects, we will gather the power of the 6 countries to overthrow that immortal sect and replace it. Rubbing his palms hard, Yen Bugue smiled and said, "The imperial advisors and the 6 emperors are just one step away from becoming heaven immortals. As long as we have heaven immortals in our countries, the sky will be high and the sea will be wide, and we will be able to do whatever we want. His Majesty has said it himself, why can't this part of the starry sky become the territory of Great Yen?" Wu Qi was at a loss. He shook his head and said helplessly, "I knew it. I knew it." Wu Qi smiled bitterly in his mind. He had lured White Cloud Immortal Sect to avoid an imminent crisis for himself, but in the end, he had brought an even greater crisis to the cultivators in this part of the starry sky. He broke a small hole in the cage that imprisoned a group of fierce tigers. Then, the group of tigers leaped out of the cage happily, and could not wait to eat the humans. God bless them. Wu Qi stretched out his hand and drew a cross on his chest. Yen Bugui did not understand the meaning of Wu Qi's gesture. Surprised, he asked, God? The legendary ancient heavenly emperor? Wu Qi answered Yen Bugui's question with a vague answer. He shook his head and breathed out a long sigh. Well, after 3 years of recuperation, Wu Qi had no choice but to work hard to catch up, to develop his overall strength on various planets. At least, he needed the power to protect himself, enough to keep himself alive from those enemies. It was hard to imagine how much pressure Wu Qi would have to face when Heaven Immortals emerged from the 6 dynasties, wiped out many immortal sects, and took control of many immortal sects in Liyuan Galaxy. Perhaps? Should Wu Qi inform Patriarch Jiang Yun now? But very soon, Wu Qi dismissed the idea. Those who left Myriad Immortals planet were not only from the few dynasties, but also from Great Yen. In Great Yen dynasty, not only did he have enemies, he also had friends and brothers. Especially, Princess Zhanglu was born in Great Yen, and her father was Yen Qijuan, the crown prince of Great Yen. No matter how powerful Wu Qi was, he could not change this fact. Perhaps he could stop the secret operation of the 6 dynasties, but it would mean breaking off all relations with the people of the 6 dynasties. Even Jing Ku and the others would not forgive Wu Qi. At the very least, now that the 2 immortal sects had occupied White Cloud Immortal Sect and rescued the 6 dynasties from the hands of Han Shao Immortal and the other evil immortals, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties would owe Wu Qi a favor. At least, it was Wu Qi's plan that allowed the 2 relatively gentle and relaxed immortal sects to descend upon Myriad Immortals planet, and not those evil immortals who were greedy, evil, and bloodthirsty by nature. Therefore, although no one said it out loud, everyone knew very well that the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties actually owed Wu Qi a favor. Even though it was because of him that Wu Qi brought the 2 immortal sects here, all the people of the 6 dynasties owed him a favor. But, once Wu Qi leaked the secret of the 6 dynasties' plan to Patriarch Jiang Yun, the 6 dynasties would instantly become Wu Qi's enemies. Just think about it, all the people of the 6 dynasties would become his enemies. Ying Zheng, Yan Dan, Tian Wen, Zhao Sheng, Chu Ping, Wei Wuji, Mod, Sun Kuang, Gigazi. Wu Qi took a deep breath, completely dispelling the impulse to leak the secret. Shaking his head helplessly, he said, I want Gutai dynasty. A smile emerged on Yen Bugui's face, then he lowered his voice and said, what General Jing Ke said is right. Even if Duke of Tianyun learns about this, he will only take a share of the benefits, and will never leak the secret to White Cloud Immortal Sect. The hair on Wu Qi's back suddenly stood up. He glared at Yen Bugui, sneered, and said, do I look like that kind of a man? Ugh, what did General Jing Ke say? Yen Bugui nodded and said, half a month ago, when the people of the 6 dynasties were dispatched, General Jing Ke said that we should inform Duke of Tianyun and sect leader in advance. General Jing Ke said that after all, we are on the same side. The reason why Duke of Tianyun joined White Cloud Immortal Sect is to resist the pressure from Lu Buwei, Xiang Yu, and the others. As long as Duke of Tianyun has the overall strength to fight against them, Duke of Tianyun will not be loyal to White Cloud Immortal Sect. Wu Qi gave Yen Bugui a glance speechlessly. It was a very bad feeling, as it was a very bad feeling to be seen through by someone. Over the past few days, he had not contacted Lu Qingfeng and the others, as he had been spending all his time with Princess Zhanglu on White Cloud Planet. That was why he did not know about the major change. After pondering for a while, Wu Qi stretched out his hand and said, I want a copy of the location of all the grand universal teleportation formations on Myriad Immortals planet. After that, I'll summon all the people from the 6 dynasties in Tai City. With my status as the executing disciple of White Cloud Immortal Sect's Discipline Hall, I'll announce that Gutai dynasty is my territory. They can do whatever they want in other places, but this place, this dynasty, is mine. Yen Bugue grinned, then fished out a jade slip and gave it to Wu Qi. After that, he sent his divine will into the jade slip and memorized the coordinates. After that, Wu Qi selected several hundred remote planets from the several thousands of coordinates he had identified from the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation on White Cloud Planet and imprinted them into the jade slip. Throwing the jade slip back to Yen Bugue, Wu Qi smiled and said, "I'll give you a chance to earn some merit. Give this jade slip to His Majesty, and tell him that it's the coordinates of the planets that you and I discovered together. His Majesty will be pleased, as it will give us, Great Yen, an absolute strategic advantage." Compared to the other 5 dynasties, Great Yen had control over several hundred planets' coordinates. As long as they could send some capable men to make arrangements in advance on those planets, it would be a great advantage. Yen Bugue was struck with wild joy. Of course, he knew the significance of these coordinates. Each planet represented countless mortals, and a vast amount of resources. Even though the cultivation resources produced by a planet were limited, when the resources produced by several hundred or even thousands of planets were gathered together and provided for the benefit of the upper echelons of a dynasty, it would be an astronomical figure. Many immortal sects in Liyuan Galaxy had reached a tacit agreement, reaching a delicate balance. No one dared to invade the planets of another. But, the group of people from 6 dynasties was different. Their foundation was in Myriad Immortals' planet, and they were outsiders. They could use all the means they had without any scruples, and they had the ambition, confidence, and ability to invade this part of the starry sky. Holding the jade slip in his hand, Yen Bugue was grinning from ear to ear. No matter where Wu Qi found these coordinates, as long as he could prove that these coordinates were real, perhaps the merit would be enough for him to be conferred a decent title of nobility. Marquis, or something else. Wu Qi frowned and pondered without saying a word. All of a sudden, he heard a rapid wind-piercing noise coming from a distance. He raised his head abruptly and cried out in a low voice, "Who are you trying to assassinate? What is the cultivation base of those great Zhao's sinecures? Do they know that you are from Great Yen's scouting office?" Yen Bugue raised his brows and said in shock, "The man we are trying to assassinate is the right commander of Gu Tai Dynasty's imperial army. Once we kill him, the deputy commander controlled by Great Yen will take over his position, and control 1/3 of the imperial army. But, there are a few nascent soul sinecures from Great Zhao here, and I believe they have recognized the cultivation technique we are practicing. After all, only Great Yen's scouting office uses a large number of wind-breaking wolves as beast souls." Wu Qi sprung to his feet abruptly. The wind-piercing noise was getting closer and closer. Wu Qi raised his head and looked up, and saw a few bright beams pressing down from the clouds high up in the sky. "Gold horn, silver horn, get ready to fight the enemy," Wu Qi cried out sternly. "Yen Bugue, retreat now, and help me protect my 2 disciples." Before his words could fade away, a wretched green ghost suddenly emerged from the void next to Wu Qi. A man with a strange face that made him look like an evil ghost leaped out and hugged Wu Qi. His body expanded at an incredible speed, while a very dense ghost energy wrapped around Wu Qi. "Not good!" cried Wu Qi. Without hesitation, he sprung into a bright beam and shot up into the sky, flying up together with the man. The speed of the magnetic sword escape beam was incredibly fast. When Wu Qi had flown less than 10 miles away with the man, a loud boom rang out. The man who was hugging Wu Qi had self-detonated his nascent soul, unleashing a glowing green ghost flame that enveloped Wu Qi entirely. The shockwave spread out in all directions, lifting and shattering the rock layers one by one. Large amounts of crushed rocks and soil were sent flying several dozens of miles away. Yen Bugue and his company were forced to lie flat on the ground, nearly blown away by the strong wind. Yen Bugue fixed his gaze at the direction where the green light emerged, roaring at the top of his voice. It was a death warrior, a nascent soul death warrior. Who was the mastermind behind this bold move of using a nascent soul death warrior to kill Wu Qi? Chapter 314. It was an early-stage nascent soul realm earth immortal who suddenly leaped out and hugged Wu Qi. On top of that, he was a ghost immortal who practiced the cultivation technique of ghost cultivators. His entire body was stained with ghost aura and death aura, and every single strand of his hair contained the most poisonous phosphorescence. Different from the ghost immortal guards secretly trained by Great Yen Imperial Palace, this ghost immortal was half human and half ghost. Half of his body was condensed from ghost aura, and the power of his self-explosion was extremely powerful. Wu Qi was caught unprepared, and the ghost immortal got close to him. Fearing that the self-explosion would hurt Yen Bugue and the others, Wu Qi hastily rode on the sword beam and fled far away. But, before he could travel 10 miles away, the ghost immortal had already self-detonated. Deadly venom, evil aura, and shrill ghost howls that could directly attack one's soul came crashing towards Wu Qi, enveloping him tightly. They were about to tear his body apart, crush him, melt him into a clump of venomous liquid, and then be burned into ashes by the phosphorescence. Before the innate earth element dragon scale shield could be activated, the black dragon spirit ring worn by Wu Qi had already reacted. A dragon roar rang out, as countless pitch-black dragon scales shot out from the surface of the black dragon spirit ring, sticking closely to Wu Qi's body and forming into a set of sturdy dragon scale armor. A large sheet of bright light was seen rolling and rocking rapidly on the surface of the armor. The dense patterns on the surface of the dragon scales tore and crushed the tremendous pressure bit by bit, allowing it to quickly disperse through Wu Qi's body, preventing it from causing too much damage to Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi's body was trembling violently, and he nearly fainted from the impact. Although the Black Dragon Spirit Ring had taken the initiative to protect him, and he had been diligently cultivating the Dragon Transformation script for the past 3 years to gradually improve the strength of his fleshly body, the explosion still made him cough out a mouthful of blood. Stars swayed before his eyes, and all his internal organs were shaking violently, as if they were about to burst out from his mouth. Fortunately, the spirit-restricting rope was an immortal item, and its item spirit had cultivated to the realm of spirit immortal. Although it did not have a fleshly body, and was only a thread of its divine spirit, it was still an immortal item. A beam of purple light shot out from Wu Qi's left wrist, coiling around Wu Qi like a flood dragon, shattering more than 80% of the energy ripples produced by the nascent Soul Earth Immortal's self-detonation. A faintly discernible figure emerged from the rope, performing an incantation gesture with both hands and releasing it into the surroundings, quickly calming the violent energy ripples in the surroundings. If not for the spirit-restricting rope taking the initiative, the self-detonation of a nascent soul realm Earth Immortal would have turned everything within a radius of 100 miles into dust, and none of Yen Bugue and the others would have escaped. The spirit-restricting rope calmed down the ripples of energy in the surroundings, and only then did the item spirit return to it. The purple gleam retracted and returned to Wu Qi's wrist, transforming into a thin thread. Wu Qi threw his head back and roared furiously, "Bastard! Don't let me know who you are, or else." Amidst a few beams of light falling down from the sky, a surprised cry of Duke of Longyang was heard. "Io, isn't this Duke of Tianyun? How did he end up in such a sorry state? Stop! Stop! This is Duke Tianyun of Great Yen Dynasty. He is one of us, Great Wei's man." As the bright light faded away, the enchanting Lord of Longyang descended from the sky, stepping on a jade-colored silk handkerchief while smiling. Seeing that figure, that graceful bearing, as well as the high-grade magic treasure embroidered handkerchief under his feet, Wu Qi did not know why, but all the hairs on his body stood on end. After retrieving the dragon scale armor transformed from the black dragon spirit ring, Wu Qi spat out a mouthful of saliva mixed with blood, then flew back to the side of Yen Bugue and the others. Both Gold Horn and Silver Horn were very clever and quick-witted. When the self-explosion happened, the two great pythons shot out like two rainbows. Gold Horn coiled up into a snake formation, protecting Yen Bugue and a few other scouting officers, while Silver Horn rushed forward and surrounded Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan. When the Ghost Immortal self-detonated, a great amount of rocks came smashing and smashed onto the two great pythons, producing countless sparks. However, none of them hurt Yen Bugue, Li Yifeng, and Zi Qianyan. On the contrary, some of the secret agents of scouting officers had their arms or legs broken, or were thrown 7 to 8 miles away by the strong wind. However, these were just minor injuries, not worth mentioning. Throwing a bottle of healing spirit medicine to Yen Bugue, Wuqi rolled his eyes and stared at Lord of Longyang, sneered and said, "My lord, is the guy who self-detonated your man?" Lord of Longyang's face turned pale as he kept shaking his head. Stepping on the handkerchief, he descended from the sky, which transformed into a cloud and flew back into his sleeve. Slowly, he came next to Wuqi, gave Wuqi a long and bitter look, breathed out a long sigh and said, "What kind of person does Duke Wuqi think of me as?" Turning his gaze to Yen Bugue, Lord of Longyang chuckled and said, "I swear to the heaven, that man has absolutely nothing to do with me. However, Zhao Ta does have 2 ghost immortals with him." Zhao Ta. Wuqi gave Lord of Longyang a glare. Standing next to him, Yen Bugue shook his dizzy head and said hastily, "Zhao Ta, the son of Great Zhao's emperor, Marquis Zhuang. Just now, when we were retreating from the village, we saw him rushing out with a group of men. He should be in that village just now." Lord of Longyang smiled and said, "With Commander Yen as witness, Longyang is innocent. I have no idea where this ghost immortal with Zhao Ta came from, but he has been following Zhao Ta since 3 years ago. Just now, when Longyang brought his men to the village, he was planning to kill Zhao Ta with a single sword strike. But unexpectedly, Zhao Ta had already left with his men, and even the commander of Imperial Army was nowhere to be found. Who would have thought that this ghost immortal would come here to assassinate Duke Wuqi?" Wuqi bowed his head and pondered. After a while, Wuqi suddenly raised his head and said with a smile, "Very well, I think I know who it is. What does my lord want to teach Wuqi?" Lord of Longyang gave Wuqi an appreciative look, then turned to look at Yen Bugue and said, "It is not a secret. But, according to the investigation conducted by Great Wei's Grand Council, Great Zhao believes that the person who killed Zhao Ling in Sung Ao Immortal Abode is related to Duke Wuqi, and the person who framed up Lu Bue is also Duke Wuqi." Wuqi was taken aback, then he laughed and said, "Why do you say that? Wuqi only has the cultivation base of Jin Dan. How could he kill people at will in Sung Ao Immortal Abode?" Lord of Longyang spread his palms, indicating that he had no idea why Great Zhao and Lu Bue could be so sure about this. Yen Bugue's face darkened as he listened to Lord of Longyang's words. As the commander of Scouting Office, he had a very sensitive sense of information. There were some things in Lord of Longyang's words that were worth investigating. Especially, how did Great Wei come to know the internal information of Great Zhao? And the relationship between Lu Bue and Great Zhao, these were all very serious matters. Wuqi frowned, as a wave of anger rose from his heart. He said coldly, "Who cares? My lord, please deliver a message for Wuqi. Tomorrow at noon, Wuqi wants to meet all the people from the 6 dynasties who are in charge of Gu Tai dynasty's affairs in Hidden Sword Pavilion. Wuqi wants this Gu Tai dynasty." Wuqi handed the medallion that represented his identity as the executing disciple of White Cloud Immortal Sect's Discipline Hall to Lord of Longyang, then looked at Lord of Longyang, smiled and said, "I believe my lord has a way to inform these people. I'll have to trouble you, please." Lord of Longyang gave Wuqi a glance, chuckled and said, "Duke Wuqi, you are being too courteous, and treating me like an outsider. What are these things to me? It just so happens that Longyang can get closer to Duke Wuqi, and I'll have more chances to rely on Duke Wuqi in the future. The wind and clouds are gathering now, and the storm is about to rise. Duke Wuqi has been living a carefree life for 3 years, but now, he can no longer ignore the affairs of the world." Pointing his finger at the nearly 1-mile-wide crater caused by the self-explosion of the Ghost Immortal, Lord of Longyang stared at Wuqi and said, "Duke Wuqi, the matter regarding Duke Wuqi has arrived." Wuqi's face was gloomy, and he did not say a word. That's right, 3 peaceful years had passed, and the era of change had arrived. Regardless of whether he was willing to or not, he had to face this treacherous test. The next day, at noon, in the north private room on the 6th floor of Hidden Sword Pavilion that had just been renovated, people from 6 dynasties were sitting around a large round table. Wu Qi sat on the seat of honor, coldly looking at the group of people who sat around the table without saying a word. Lao Ai represented Great Yen. Zhao Ta represented Great Zhao. Xiang Yu represented Great Chu. Meng Tian represented Daqin. Tian Dan represented Great Qi. Lord of Longyang represented Great Wei. Wu Qi rubbed his temples with both of his hands, feeling a headache coming on. What kind of people were these? Then, he looked at the 8 princes of Gu Tai dynasty, who were serving behind these 6 lords with utmost respect, and Wu Qi nearly threw his head back and let out a long sigh. The Gu Tai dynasty was like a little lamb. How could it withstand the invasion of 6 hungry wolves? After a full hour of silence, during which the group of people stared at each other with their eyes wide open, Wu Qi finally said coldly, "Everyone, please give Wu Qi a little face." Wu Qi has been ordered by Jiangqing Zi, the preceptor of Discipline Hall, to deal with the succession of Gu Tai dynasty's imperial authority. The territory of Gu Tai dynasty belongs to me now. As for the other several hundred dynasties, I will not compete with any of you. I only want Gu Tai dynasty. Pointing at Li Yifeng, who stood next to him, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "He will be the new emperor of Gu Tai dynasty from now on." The 8 princes of Gu Tai dynasty, Qi, immediately raised their heads and glared at Li Yifeng. When Wu Qi saw the unconvinced and resentful faces of the 8 princes, he snorted coldly and said, "What? Are you not convinced? Could it be that you will only be convinced after you are punished by the sect rules?" The 8 princes exchanged a glance, bowed their heads in fear and trepidation, and dared not to say a word. Only then did they remember that they were the outer sect disciples of White Cloud Immortal sect, and this Wu Qi before them was the preceptor of Discipline Hall appointed by the sect. Even if he wanted Gu Tai dynasty to be replaced, he could do it with just a word. Sighing lightly, Wu Qi knocked on the table and asked in an indifferent tone, "Gentlemen, do you agree with what Wu Qi has done?" Xiang Yu gave a cold laugh, rose to his feet, and swaggered out of the room. He said in an indifferent tone, "Let's see if you can keep this foundation." Duke of Longyang smiled sweetly and said with a gentle voice, "It is just a mere Gu Tai dynasty. If Duke Wu Qi wants it, it will belong to Duke Wu Qi." Tian Dan and the others exchanged a glance, then nodded indifferently. They really didn't put a small country in their eyes. Speaking of which, the territory of Gu Tai dynasty was only about the total area of the few vassal kingdoms under the 6 dynasties combined, and its resources were far less abundant than those vassal kingdoms on Myriad Immortals' planet. Therefore, it was not a loss for the 6 dynasties to give up a small Gu Tai dynasty. After a brief moment of pondering, Meng Tian cried out, "Duke of Tianyun, will you not interfere with our business in the future?" Wu Qi gave Meng Tian a deep look, who had deep eye sockets and a high nose bridge, then said with a deep voice, "Yes, it is just Gu Tai dynasty. This place belongs to me, and I will turn a blind eye to what you are doing. But, for the sake that we are from the same clan, Wu Qi will remind you that White Cloud Planet is the foundation of White Cloud Immortal sect. Don't bring trouble to yourselves." Right when Wu Qi's voice faded away, a series of hurried footsteps was heard coming from outside the veranda. A man with an enchanting face, so beautiful that Wu Qi could not tell whether he was a man or a woman, rushed into the room, hastily handing over a small jade slip to Duke of Longyang. When Duke of Longyang gave the jade slip a glance with his divine will, his pretty face fell instantly. He raised his head, looked at Wu Qi, and said, "The Crown Prince of Great Yen, Yen Qijuan, was attacked on Shui Yuan planet. No one knows if he is still alive or not." Wu Qi was taken aback, and he sprung to his feet. "You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.